She was worth $4 billion. She owned half the land in West Texas, controlled 3 corporations, and had a security team that could rival a small army. But the night a broke, desperate single father showed up at her gates during the worst storm in a decade, dragging his 8-year-old daughter behind him and carrying nothing but a rusted toolbox, the most powerful woman in the state looked at him like he was the first real person she'd seen in years. What happened inside that mansion over the next 48 hours would destroy a family empire, expose a murder covered up for a decade, and prove that sometimes the people who have nothing are the only ones brave enough to save the people who have everything. If this story moves you, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every word of this matters. The truck made a sound Damian Carter had never heard before. A deep, grinding moan from somewhere underneath the chassis, like metal bones snapping one by one, and then the steering wheel locked hard to the right. "Daddy?" Ellie's voice came from the passenger seat, small, careful. The voice of a kid who'd already learned that when things went wrong, you didn't scream. You got quiet. You watched your father's face and figured out how bad it was before he told you. Damian wrestled the wheel back straight, his knuckles white, rain hammering the windshield so hard the wipers couldn't keep up. The 2-lane highway had disappeared about 10 minutes ago, swallowed by water running across the asphalt in brown sheets that reflected his headlights back at him, like the road itself was trying to blind him. "We're fine, Bug." "You always say that." "Because we always are." She didn't argue. She just pulled her knees up onto the seat and hugged the stuffed rabbit she'd been carrying since she was 3. The rabbit was missing an eye and most of its left ear, but Ellie treated it like the last valuable thing in the world, which, in a way, it was. Her mother had given it to her. Her mother who'd been dead for 4 years now, buried in a cemetery outside Hargrove, where the headstone was already starting to lean because Damian couldn't afford to have it reset. He checked the rearview mirror. Nothing behind them. Nothing ahead of them. Just water and darkness and the occasional flash of lightning that lit up the flat Texas landscape like a photograph. Mesquite trees bent sideways, fence posts standing in 2 feet of muddy runoff, a dead armadillo floating past a cattle guard. The GPS on his phone had died 20 minutes ago. Service out here was a joke on a good day. Tonight, with the storm cell sitting right on top of them like it had personal business with this particular stretch of highway, there was nothing. No signal, no map. Just the directions he'd scribbled on the back of a gas station receipt before they'd left Hargrove. Sinclair Ranch, County Road 412, gate code 7719. Be there by 9. It was already 10:15. The job had come through Ray Munoz, who ran the only hardware store left in Hargrove, and who'd been throwing Damian repair work for the past 2 years. Mostly busted fences, leaking roofs, the kind of stuff nobody wanted to do themselves, but everybody needed done. Ray had called that morning, talking fast the way he did when the money was good. "Listen, I got something. Big job. Private ranch outside Marfa. Owner needs emergency repair on some generator housing. Structural stuff, welding, the whole deal. Storm knocked part of the outbuilding sideways. They want it fixed before the next front comes through." "How big?" 5,000. Damian had been standing in his kitchen, staring at the stack of bills on the counter. Electric, water, the payment plan from the hospital that never seemed to go down no matter how much he sent them. $5,000 was more than he'd made in the last 2 months combined. Cash? Cash. But here's the thing, it's Sinclair Ranch. The pause that followed was the kind of pause that had weight to it. Even through the phone, Damian could feel Ray choosing his next words carefully. "Vivian Sinclair's place." "I know whose place it is, Ray." Everybody in West Texas knew whose place it was. Vivian Sinclair. The name showed up in newspapers, in whispered conversations at the feed store, in the kind of gossip that people shared with lowered voices and raised eyebrows. 30 years old. Billionaire. Inherited the Sinclair family's energy and land empire after some kind of family tragedy nobody could agree on the details of. Some people said she was brilliant. Some people said she was dangerous. Most people said both, and then changed the subject. What everybody agreed on was simpler. Nobody lasted long out at that ranch. Workers came and went. Staff rotated every few months. The security team was the only constant, big men in dark SUVs who came into town for supplies and never made small talk. I know the rumors, Damien said. I also know my daughter needs new shoes and I'm 3 months behind on the electric. Just be careful. And Damien, she specifically asked for someone who could do structural welding. Not a lot of guys out here can do that. This is your skill set. Don't blow it. So here he was, driving into a storm with his 8-year-old daughter because he couldn't afford a babysitter, and he sure as hell couldn't afford to turn down $5,000. Father of the year. The truck groaned again. Damien felt the transmission slip, catch, slip again. He'd rebuilt this transmission himself 18 months ago using parts he'd pulled from a junked F-150 behind the Dairy Queen in Fort Stockton. It wasn't pretty work, but it held. Most of the time. Daddy, I can see a light. He leaned forward, squinting through the rain. She was right. Way out ahead of them, maybe half a mile off the road, there was a glow. Not sharp, not bright, but steady. The kind of light that meant a building. A big one. That's it, Bug. That's where we're going. The gate appeared out of the darkness like something from another world. 12 feet of wrought iron, flanked by stone pillars with security cameras mounted on top, the lenses catching the lightning and blinking like mechanical eyes. Behind the gate, a paved road, actual pavement, not the crumbling asphalt they'd been driving on, stretched toward the light in the distance. Damien pulled up to the keypad and rolled down his window. Rain immediately soaked his left arm and shoulder. He punched in the code Ray had given him. Nothing happened for 3 long seconds. Then a buzz, a click, and the gate swung inward slowly, like the ranch was deciding whether or not to let him in. The driveway was a 1/4 mile long, lined with fencing that looked new, expensive, the kind of fencing that cost more per foot than Damien made in a day. Beyond it, even through the rain, he could make out the shapes of outbuildings. A massive barn, what looked like a horse stable, some kind of equipment shed with its roof partially caved in. That would be the job. And then the house. Damien had seen nice houses. He'd worked on nice houses. He'd replaced copper pipes in a ranch home outside Alpine that had a swimming pool and a home theater. But this wasn't a nice house. This was something else entirely. 3 stories of stone and timber, sprawling across the landscape like it had grown there, with floor-to-ceiling windows that glowed warm amber against the storm. A covered porch wrapped around the front, supported by massive cedar beams. There were at least 4 chimneys that he could count, and the front entrance was framed by iron lanterns that threw flickering shadows across the stone. "Daddy," Ellie whispered, "is this a hotel?" "No, baby. Someone lives here." "Just one person?" "I think so." Ellie pressed her face against the window. "That's sad." He pulled the truck up to the front of the house and killed the engine. For a moment they just sat there, listening to the rain pound the roof and the wind push against the doors like something trying to get in. "Okay, here's the plan. We go inside, I talk to the lady who owns this place. I figure out the job, and you sit somewhere quiet with your book and your rabbit. Deal?" "What if she's mean?" "Then I'll be polite, and she'll be mean, and I'll fix her building, and we'll go home with money. That's how jobs work." "That's depressing." "You're 8. You don't get to use that word yet." She grinned at him. A quick flash of her mother's smile, the one that always hit him like a sucker punch. And then they were out of the truck and running through the rain toward the porch. The front door opened before Damien could knock. The man standing there was big, not tall big, thick big. The kind of build that came from years of serious physical work, or serious physical training, or both. He wore a black polo shirt tucked into black tactical pants, and there was a radio clipped to his belt and an earpiece curling up from his collar. "You Carter?" The man's voice was flat, professional. The voice of someone who asked questions he already knew the answers to. "Yeah, sorry I'm late. Storm." "Come in." The man stepped aside. Damien guided Ellie through the doorway and immediately felt the temperature change. Warm, dry air that smelled like wood smoke, and something else, something expensive that he couldn't identify. The foyer was enormous. Stone floors, high ceiling, a staircase that curved upward into shadow. There was art on the walls. Big, abstract pieces that probably cost more than his house. Ellie pressed closer to his leg. The security man, because that's clearly what he was, looked at Ellie for a moment with an expression that might have been surprise, or might have been disapproval. Hard to tell. She wasn't mentioned. Couldn't find a sitter. She won't be any trouble. Miss Sinclair doesn't... Marcus. A voice from somewhere deeper in the house. Female. Clear. The kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. Let them in. Both of them. Marcus, the security man, didn't argue. He just nodded once, stepped aside further, and gestured toward a hallway on the left. They followed the hallway past a living room that could have held Damien's entire house inside it, past a kitchen with an island bigger than his truck bed, past windows that looked out onto the storm like they were screens showing a movie about the end of the world. Ellie held his hand tight, her wet shoes squeaking on the stone floor, her eyes wide and moving everywhere. The hallway ended at a study, or an office, or a library. Damien wasn't sure what to call it. 3 walls of bookshelves, floor to ceiling, a fireplace with a real fire burning low, a desk that looked like it was made from a single slab of dark wood, and behind the desk, standing with her back to them, looking out a rain-streaked window at the storm, Vivian Sinclair. She turned around. Damien had seen pictures of her. Everyone had. The business magazines, the newspaper articles, the occasional society page photo from some Dallas charity event where she stood at the edge of the frame looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. But pictures didn't capture it. She was... And he registered this with the detached honesty of a man too tired to pretend otherwise. Striking. Dark hair pulled back, sharp features, eyes that were somewhere between brown and black and that looked at him the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Clinical, thorough, already forming conclusions. She was wearing jeans and a dark sweater that looked soft and expensive, and she had no makeup on, and her feet were bare on the stone floor. That detail stuck with him, bare feet. In a house this size, this formal, she was walking around barefoot like a kid in summer. "You're late." Storm got bad on 412, lost the GPS about 20 miles out. "You should have left earlier." He felt his jaw tighten. $5,000. Think about the $5,000. "You're right, I should have. I'm here now." Her eyes moved from him to Ellie. Something changed in her face, not softened exactly, but shifted, like a door opening a crack and then closing again before you could see what was behind it. "This is your daughter." "Ellie, she'll stay out of your way." "I don't care about that." Vivian came around the desk. She moved with the kind of deliberate control that suggested she thought about every step before she took it. She crouched down, actually crouched, getting to eye level with Ellie. And her voice changed. Not warm, exactly, but less sharp. "Ellie, are you hungry?" Ellie looked up at Damien. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. I'm not old enough for that." A ghost of something that might have been amusement. "Come on! Both of you. You're soaking wet, and you probably haven't eaten since you left, wherever you came from." "Hargrove." "Right. Hargrove." She said it the way people say the name of a place they've heard of, but never had reason to visit. The way you might say Uzbekistan, or the bottom of the ocean. She led them to the kitchen herself, which surprised Damien. He'd expected a housekeeper, a cook, someone, but the house seemed empty, except for them and Marcus and the storm outside. Vivian opened the refrigerator, a massive thing, stainless steel built into the wall, and started pulling out containers. "I don't cook," she said, like she was confessing something embarrassing. "My staff prepares meals and I eat them later. There's chicken, pasta, some kind of salad situation that I think involves avocado." Ellie perked up. "I love avocado." "Then we have something in common." Damien watched from the doorway as Vivian Sinclair, billionaire, corporate predator, the woman whose name people in Hargrove said the way they'd say rattlesnake, heated up chicken strips for his daughter and served them on a plate that probably cost more than his monthly grocery bill. She moved around the kitchen with an awkwardness that was almost endearing, opening the wrong drawer twice looking for forks, burning her finger on the microwave plate and swearing under her breath. She wasn't what he'd expected, which didn't mean she was something safe. While Ellie ate, Vivian took Damien to a second-floor window that overlooked the damaged outbuilding. Through the rain, he could see it. The generator housing, a concrete and steel structure about the size of a two-car garage, with one wall partially buckled and the roof peeled back on one corner. Wind took part of the roof 2 nights ago. The wall shifted. My generator system is exposed and the next storm front, this one, is pushing water into the housing. I need the wall resecured and the roof temporarily sealed before it gets worse. Damien studied the damage through the window. It was serious work. The kind of work that needed a full crew, a welder, a crane for the roof panels. Not one guy with a toolbox. That's a big job for one person. That's why I'm paying $5,000 for one night. It might not be possible to finish in one night. Then finish what you can and we'll discuss the rest. She turned from the window. There are tools in the main barn, welding equipment, structural supplies, whatever you need. My previous maintenance foreman kept it well stocked before he left. The pause before left was deliberate. Damien caught it. Why'd he leave? People leave. She said it flatly, like she was stating a law of physics. Water flows downhill, the sun comes up. People leave. Your daughter can sleep in one of the guest rooms. I'll have Marcus show her. She stays where I can check on her. Fine. The guest quarters closest to the barn then. Marcus will set it up. She started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. Mr. Carter. Damien. She looked at him for a moment. Damien, this ranch is private property. While you're here, you work on the generator housing. You don't wander. You don't go into the east wing of the house. You don't ask my security staff questions. Clear? Crystal. Good. She left. Damien stood at the window, watching the storm throw itself against the glass, and thought about the way she'd said people leave, like she was talking about herself as much as anyone else. He got Ellie settled in the guest room, which was bigger than her actual bedroom, and had sheets that felt like they'd been woven from something found only in dreams, and told her the rules. Stay in this room. Read your book. If you need me, Marcus is right down the hall and he'll come get me. I don't like Marcus. You don't have to like him. You just have to listen to him if something happens. He looks like he eats nails for breakfast. That's not a nice thing to say. It's an accurate thing to say. She was so much like her mother that it physically hurt sometimes. That quick wit, that refusal to let anything slide, that way of looking at the world with suspicious amusement. Sarah had been like that. Sarah, who'd made him laugh every single day of their marriage, who'd died in a hospital bed at 27 from a cancer they'd caught too late, because they didn't have insurance, and by the time they scraped together the money for the tests, it had already spread, and there was nothing left to do but hold her hand and watch her leave. People leave. I love you, Bug. I'll come check on you in a couple hours. Love you, Daddy. He kissed the top of her head, grabbed his toolbox from the truck, and headed out into the storm. The work was brutal. The generator housing wall had shifted about 8 inches off its foundation, and the steel reinforcement plates along the top had buckled like tin cans. Rain was pouring through the gap where the roof had peeled back, pooling around the base of the generator units. 3 massive diesel machines that powered the entire ranch. If they flooded, Vivian Sinclair would be sitting in a dark mansion in the middle of nowhere, with no power, no communication, and a storm that wasn't letting up. Damien assessed the damage, set up the portable welder from the barn, and got to work. He'd been welding since he was 16. His father had taught him in the garage behind their house in Odessa. Arc welding, MIG, TIE, the whole progression. His old man had been a pipeline welder, one of the best in the Permian Basin, until his back gave out, and the drinking took over and Damien left for the army at 18 because the alternative was watching his father dissolve 1 bottle at a time. The army had sharpened his skills. 4 years of maintaining equipment, repairing vehicles, building temporary structures in places where temporary was optimistic. He'd come home with a skill set and a plan to start his own welding business. Then he'd met Sarah. Then Ellie came. Then the cancer. Now he was welding a billionaire's generator housing in a thunderstorm for cash under the table because the welding business never happened, and the plan turned to ash somewhere between the oncology bills and the funeral costs. He worked for 3 hours straight, got the wall braced, got 2 of the buckled plates cut away and replaced with fresh steel from the barn's supply. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. By midnight, the access road leading back to the highway was underwater. He could see it from the generator housing, a brown river where the road used to be, carrying branches, debris, the occasional fence post tumbling past like it was late for something. They weren't going anywhere tonight. He was re-anchoring the third plate when his phone buzzed. No signal, but the text had somehow pushed through. From Ray. Flood warning for your area. Highway 412 closed both directions. Do not try to drive back. Stay put. Stay put at Sinclair Ranch. With his daughter asleep in a guest room and a billionaire who told him not to ask questions and a security man who looked like he'd been assembled in a factory for intimidating people. Great. He finished the plate, killed the welder, and walked back toward the main house to check on Ellie. The rain had soaked through every layer he was wearing. His boots made squelching sounds with every step. His hands were raw, his shoulders ached, and there was a burn on his right forearm where a spark had gotten under his glove. He was crossing the covered walkway between the barn and the house when he heard voices. Not conversation. Argument. The sound was coming from somewhere on the first floor, a room with windows facing the walkway. The windows were closed, but the voices were loud enough to bleed through the glass in the rain. Two voices. One was Vivian's, sharp and defensive. The other was a man's, deeper, older, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed. Don't get to make that decision without board approval, and you know it. I don't need the board's approval to hire a repairman, Warren. This isn't about the repairman. This is about your pattern. Every time you start letting people in, you put the entire operation at risk. Your father understood that. Your sister understood that. Don't. Charlotte understood that the family, but don't say her name. The silence that followed was charged. Damien stood in the rain, knowing he should walk away, knowing he was hearing something he wasn't supposed to hear, knowing that $5,000 wasn't worth whatever was happening behind those windows. But the man's voice came back, lower now, controlled, and what it said made Damien's skin go cold. I have protected this family for 30 years. I have protected you. Everything you have, this ranch, the company, the money, exists because of decisions I made. Decisions that weren't easy. Decisions that cost things. You don't want to test what happens when you stop being grateful for that, Vivian. You really don't. Damien moved, not away from the window, toward the house, toward Ellie, his pace quickening until he was almost running. He found the guest room, eased the door open, and there she was, asleep, curled around her one-eyed rabbit. The blankets tangled around her legs the way she always slept, like she was fighting something in her dreams. He stood there for a long time, dripping on the expensive floor, watching his daughter breathe. The man's words kept replaying in his head. Decisions that cost things. The way he'd said it. Not like a businessman talking about losses. Like a man talking about consequences he'd engineered personally. The smart thing to do was finish the job, take the money, get back to Hargrove as soon as the roads cleared, and never think about Vivian Sinclair or her uncle or this ranch again. But Damien Carter had never been especially good at doing the smart thing. He pulled a chair next to Ellie's bed, sat down in his wet clothes, and stared at the ceiling while the storm screamed outside and the biggest house he'd ever been inside settled around him like something alive, full of sounds he couldn't explain and rooms he'd been told not to enter. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Footsteps. Then nothing. He didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, he went back out to work on the roof. The rain had shifted from apocalyptic to merely terrible, and he managed to get a temporary seal on the peeled-back section using heavy-gauge sheet metal and industrial rivets from the barn. It wasn't pretty, it wouldn't win any awards, but it would hold through the rest of the storm, and that was what mattered. He was cleaning up the tools when Vivian appeared in the doorway of the generator housing. She was wearing a raincoat over her sweater, her hair wet against her forehead, holding 2 cups of coffee. She looked, and this was the only word for it, small. Not physically small, though she was shorter than he'd expected, but diminished somehow, like the argument he'd overheard had taken something out of her. You're still working. Job's not done. It's 2 a.m. I know what time it is. She walked in, looked at the repaired wall, the sealed roof, ran her hand along one of the welds. This is good work. That's what you're paying for. Most people I hire do about 60% of what I'm paying for and assume I won't notice. Most people aren't 3 months behind on their electric bill. She handed him one of the coffees. He took it. Their fingers didn't touch, but they got close, and she pulled her hand back a fraction too quickly, like the almost contact had startled her. "Your daughter," she said, and then stopped. Ellie. Ellie. How old is she? 8. Something moved across Vivian's face. That door again, Rutten, cracking open, showing a sliver of something raw behind it. She's articulate for 8. She reads a lot. Her mom was a reader. Was? She passed 4 years ago. Vivian didn't say she was sorry, didn't offer the standard condolences that people hand out like cheap business cards at a funeral. She just looked at him, and for a moment her expression wasn't clinical or controlled or sharp. It was just open, like she recognized something. "My sister was like that," she said quietly. "Charlotte. She talked like she was 30 when she was 9. Read everything she could get her hands on. Drove my parents crazy because she'd ask questions nobody wanted to answer." "How old was she when—" 12. Vivian looked away. She was 12. The rain drummed on the repaired roof. Steam rose from Damien's wet jacket in the warmth of the generator housing. Somewhere outside, something heavy, a tree branch maybe, crashed to the ground. "The man who was here earlier," Damien said carefully, "in your study." Vivian's expression closed like a vault door. "You heard that." "I wasn't trying to. I was walking past." "It doesn't matter. That was my uncle, Warren Sinclair. He's involved in the family business." "He sounded like more than that." "He is more than that." She took a sip of her coffee, and Damien noticed her hand was shaking. Not a lot, just enough. "But that's not something you need to worry about." "Probably not." "Definitely not." They stood there in the generator housing, two people with nothing in common except that they were both awake at 2 a.m. during a flood, both carrying things they didn't talk about, both drinking bad coffee that had been brewed in a kitchen worth more than most people's houses. "You should sleep," she said. "The roads won't be clear until midday at least. The guest room is yours. Both of you can stay. I'll finish the roof properly in the morning." "Fine." She turned to leave, then stopped again. She kept doing that, turning away and then turning back, like she couldn't quite commit to ending a conversation. "Damien." "Yeah?" "The things my uncle said, whatever you heard, it would be better if you forgot it." "Already forgot it." "No, you didn't." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." She looked at him for a long time. The fire from the portable heater threw shadows across her face, making her look younger, older, both at once. Then she pulled her raincoat tighter, turned around for real this time, and walked out into the storm. Damien finished his coffee. It was burned and too strong and slightly bitter, and it was the best cup of coffee he'd had in months. He went back to the guest room. Ellie was still asleep. He peeled off his wet clothes, hung them over the back of a chair that was probably an antique, wrapped himself in a towel that felt like it was made from clouds, and lay down on the bed next to his daughter. The sheets were absurdly soft. The mattress was absurdly comfortable. The whole room smelled like cedar and something clean and expensive. Ellie rolled over in her sleep and pressed her face against his shoulder. Her breath was warm and steady. Damien stared at the ceiling. He thought about the man's voice. Warren, Vivian's uncle, and the way he'd said decisions that cost things. He thought about the way Vivian had said her sister's name, like the word itself was a wound she kept reopening. He thought about the security cameras on the gate, the empty rooms, the way Marcus had looked at Ellie like she was an anomaly, something that didn't belong in the program. He thought about $5,000 and whether it was enough to justify staying in a place that felt, beneath all the luxury and the firelight and the soft sheets, like a very beautiful cage. Outside, the storm kept going. The water kept rising, and somewhere in the mansion, in one of those rooms Damien had been told not to enter, a woman who owned everything sat alone in the dark, barefoot on cold stone, holding a cup of coffee. She'd almost let a stranger see her hands shake around. The morning would come. The roads would clear. There would be decisions to make. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, there was only the rain and the breathing of his daughter beside him and the unshakable feeling, settling into his bones like cold water, that coming to this ranch was either the best or the worst decision he'd ever made, and he wouldn't know which one until it was far too late to turn back. Damien woke to silence. Not quiet. Silence. The complete unnatural absence of sound that only happens when something that's been screaming for hours suddenly stops. The storm had broken. He could feel it before he opened his eyes, the way the air pressure in the room had shifted, the way the windows weren't rattling anymore, the way the house itself seemed to be exhaling. Ellie was gone. He sat up fast, heart slamming, the sheets tangling around his legs. The bed next to him was empty, the pillow still dented from her head, the one-eyed rabbit lying on its side like it had been set down carefully. Her shoes were missing, her jacket was missing. Ellie? He was on his feet, pulling on yesterday's jeans, still damp, stiff with dried mud, and moving toward the door before his brain fully caught up with his body. The hallway was empty. Morning light came through the windows at the far end, pale and gray, and the floors were cold under his bare feet. He heard her laugh. It came from downstairs. Not a polite laugh, not a nervous laugh, but the real one. The belly laugh she saved for things that genuinely surprised her. The one that sounded so much like Sarah's that it stopped him mid-step on the staircase. He followed the sound to the kitchen. Ellie was sitting on a stool at the massive island, her feet dangling a foot off the ground, eating scrambled eggs with a fork that was too big for her hand. Across from her, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee and an expression Damien had never seen on her face before, something close to bewilderment, like she'd woken up in someone else's life, was Vivian Sinclair. And then, Ellie was saying, waving the fork for emphasis, he tried to fix the toilet himself because he said plumbers charged too much, and the whole bathroom flooded. Like actually flooded. There was water coming out under the door and everything. And Mr. Hernandez from next door came over and just stood there looking at it and said, "Damien, this is why YouTube isn't a trade school." Vivian made a sound, not quite a laugh, more like the beginning of one that she caught before it fully escaped. "Your father does his own plumbing?" "My father does everything himself, that's the problem." Damien leaned against the doorframe. "Good morning to you too." Ellie spun around on the stool, not even slightly embarrassed. "Daddy, Vivian made eggs. Well, she tried to make eggs. She burned the first batch, and the second batch was kind of gray, but the third batch is actually really good." Vivian set her mug down with careful precision. "I told you I don't cook." "You weren't kidding." "I rarely kid." Damien looked at the kitchen. There were 3 pans in the sink, a carton of eggs on the counter, with shells scattered around it like shrapnel, and a dish towel draped over what appeared to be a smoke detector that had been removed from the ceiling. "Did you disable the smoke alarm?" "I made a tactical decision," Ellie giggled. Vivian's mouth twitched. Damien crossed to the island, picked up a piece of toast from Ellie's plate, and took a bite. It was cold and slightly burnt on one side. He ate it anyway. "Road still closed?" Vivian nodded. Marcus checked at dawn. Water's receding, but the low crossing on 412 is still under about 3 feet. County says maybe this afternoon, maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow. Maybe. Damien chewed the burnt toast and thought about the electric bill, the gas he'd used driving out here. The fact that his truck's transmission had been making sounds that no transmission should make. One more day. Possibly 2. Stuck at a ranch where he'd been told not to wander, not to ask questions, and not to go into the East Wing. "I can finish the roof this morning," he said. "Permanent seal, not the patch I threw on last night." "Good. We'll discuss additional compensation for the extra time." "You don't have to. I'm not offering charity. I'm paying for labor. There's a difference, and I'd appreciate it if you understood that." The sharpness was back. Not directed at him exactly, more like a reflex, the way a dog that's been kicked too many times snaps at hands that are trying to help it. "Understood." Ellie looked between them with the expression she wore when she was assembling information. Eyes narrowed slightly, head tilted, processing. She was too smart for 8. Way too smart. The kind of smart that meant she saw things adults wished she didn't. "Can I explore the house?" she asked. "No," Damien said. "Some of it?" Vivian said at the same time. They looked at each other. The West Wing is fine, Vivian said. The library, the sunroom, the media room. Marcus can show her. I don't need a babysitter. You absolutely need a babysitter, Damien said. You're 8. You keep saying that like it means something. Vivian looked at Ellie with an expression that Damien couldn't quite read. It was intense and fragile at the same time, the way someone looks at a photograph of something they lost. You remind me of someone, Vivian said quietly. Who? Someone who asked too many questions, too. Ellie considered this. Did they get answers? The pause lasted just a beat too long. Sometimes. Damien took Ellie to brush her teeth. They'd packed a go bag because he'd learned a long time ago that when you had a kid, you always packed a go bag, and then handed her off to Marcus, who received the assignment with the enthusiasm of a man being asked to defuse a bomb. She's 8, Damien told him. I'm aware. She's going to talk a lot. I'm aware of that too. Just don't let her near anything breakable, or expensive, or electrical. That eliminates most of the house. Then you're starting to understand the challenge. Marcus looked down at Ellie. Ellie looked up at Marcus. They regarded each other the way two generals might regard each other across a battlefield, with respect, suspicion, and the mutual understanding that this was going to be a long day. Damien went back to the generator housing. In the daylight, the damage was worse than he'd thought. The temporary seal he'd put on the roof was holding, but barely. The sheet metal was already bowing under the weight of pooled water from last night's rain. The wall repair was solid, though. Good welds, clean lines. His father would have approved, and his father didn't approve of much. He spent the morning on the roof. Real repair this time, cutting away the peeled section, measuring and fitting new panels from the barn supply, welding them into place with clean runs that would hold through anything short of a tornado. The work was physical and demanding and exactly what he needed, because it kept his hands busy and his mind occupied and stopped him from thinking about the conversation he'd overheard the night before. It didn't work. He thought about it anyway. Warren Sinclair, the uncle. The voice that had made Vivian Sinclair, a woman worth $4 billion, a woman who ran corporations and employed hundreds of people and owned land that stretched from here to the horizon, sound like a scared kid being scolded. Decisions that cost things. Around noon, he climbed down from the roof to get water and found Vivian standing at the barn entrance, watching him. How long have you been standing there? Long enough to see you nearly fall off that roof twice. I didn't nearly fall. I adjusted my footing. Aggressively. He wiped his face with his shirt. She was wearing different clothes today. A white button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark pants. Business clothes. Like she'd had a meeting or was expecting one. But her feet were in boots that looked like they'd never touched actual dirt, and her hair was down, falling past her shoulders in a way that made her look less like the magazine photos and more like a person. Your daughter asked Marcus to teach her how to use the security radio, Vivian said. He said no. She asked him 12 more times. He's currently teaching her the NATO phonetic alphabet. That sounds about right. She also found my library and pulled about 30 books off the shelves. She said she was organizing them by how interesting the covers looked. I'll put them back. Don't. It's the first time anyone's actually touched those books. They walked to the barn together so Damien could get more welding rods. Inside, the barn was as immaculate as the house. Concrete floors, industrial shelving, every tool organized and labeled. But in the back corner, behind a row of storage cabinets, Damien noticed something. A wall of photographs. They were pinned to a corkboard, the old-fashioned kind, not the carefully curated gallery walls inside the mansion. Snapshots. A woman in her 30s, dark-haired, laughing on a horse. A man in a suit, stern-faced, standing in front of an oil derrick. And in the center, 2 girls, one about 12, one about 17, sitting on a fence rail with their arms around each other, squinting into the sun. The older one was clearly Vivian. The younger one had the same dark hair, the same sharp features, but softer. Her smile was wide and unguarded in a way that Vivian's never seemed to be. Charlotte. Vivian saw him looking and went very still. That was the summer before, she said. We were on the south fence. My father took that picture. He was terrible with cameras. He always cut off everyone's heads, but that one came out right. She looks like you. She looked like my mother. Vivian reached out and touched the edge of the photograph very lightly, like it might crumble. She was the good one. I was the one who studied business and learned to argue and made my father proud in the ways that mattered to him. Charlotte was the one who actually cared about people. She volunteered at the county animal shelter when she was 10. She made friendship bracelets for the ranch workers' kids. She wrote letters. What happened to her? Vivian's hand dropped from the photograph. She died. You said that last night. Because that's the answer. That's not an answer. That's a fact. They're not the same thing. She looked at him with an expression that was half anger and half something else. Surprise, maybe. Like she wasn't used to people pushing back. Like the people in her life either agreed with her or feared her. And neither response had prepared her for someone who just didn't. She drowned, Vivian said. In the stock tank on the east side of the property. She was 12. It was ruled accidental. She went swimming alone, hit her head, went under. That's the official version. And the unofficial version? Doesn't exist. Officially. The barn was quiet. Outside, Damien could hear the distant sound of water still draining through the property. The flood receding, but not gone, leaving behind mud and debris and the smell of wet earth. You don't believe it was an accident, he said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Vivian turned away from the photographs. When she spoke again, her voice had that controlled flatness, the one she used like armor. Charlotte was the best swimmer in the county. She'd been swimming in that stock tank since she was 6. She could hold her breath for nearly 3 minutes. My father timed her once. She made it 2 minutes and 47 seconds and came up laughing while the rest of us were panicking. She paused. The coroner said she hit her head on the concrete edge. There was a wound. The wound was real, but Charlotte knew that tank better than anyone alive. She knew where every edge was, every shallow spot, every place where the concrete was cracked. The idea that she just forgot or slipped or made a mistake she'd never made in 6 years of swimming there every single day, I never accepted it. But I was 17 and nobody asks a 17-year-old what she thinks about a coroner's report. Who was there that day? My uncle, Warren. The name came out hard, like something she was spitting out. He was managing the ranch while my parents were in Houston for a board meeting. He was the one who found her. He was the one who called it in. He was the one who stood in our living room that night and told my parents it was an accident and that it was nobody's fault and that we needed to focus on the family, on keeping things together, on not letting grief destroy what our family had built. And your parents believed him? My father believed him because he wanted to. Because the alternative was something he couldn't survive. And my mother stopped believing in anything after that. She died 3 years later. Heart failure, they said, but hearts don't fail for no reason. Hers failed because she lost Charlotte and she couldn't carry it. The welder in Damien's hand felt very heavy suddenly. He set it down on the workbench. Vivian, I know what you're going to say. I don't think you do. You're going to say I should go to the police or hire an investigator or confront Warren or do something brave and decisive that makes sense in a movie. But you don't understand how this works. Warren controls 40% of Sinclair Holdings through a trust my father set up before he died. He sits on the board. He has relationships with every banker, every lawyer, every judge in this part of the state. He has things, documentation, records, things he's collected over the years that he uses to make sure people do what he wants them to do. Blackmail. He'd call it risk management. Her voice was bitter. I tried to push back once, about 8 years ago. I hired an attorney, a good one, from Austin. We started looking into Charlotte's death, into the trust structure, into Warren's management of company assets during the years when my father was declining. You know what happened? Tell me. The attorney's office burned down. Not completely, just enough. The files we'd been building, the copies of the coroner's report, the financial records I'd pulled from the company server. All of it. The fire marshal said it was electrical. Faulty wiring in an old building could have happened to anyone. But it didn't happen to anyone. No. It happened to the one person who was helping me ask questions Warren didn't want asked. And after that, the attorney dropped the case. He was polite about it. He said he'd reassess the viability of the claims and didn't feel he could effectively represent my interests moving forward. Very professional, very clean, and when I looked at him across his new temporary desk in his borrowed office, he wouldn't meet my eyes. Damien leaned against the workbench. He was a welder from a dying town. He fixed things: fences, roofs, generators, trucks. He was good at understanding how pieces fit together, how structures held or failed, where the weak points were. And what Vivian was describing had the architecture of something he recognized from his time in the army. Not a building, not a machine, but a system. A system designed to contain, to control, to make sure certain doors stayed closed. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "You told me last night to forget what I heard. Now you're standing in a barn giving me the whole story. What changed?" Vivian was quiet for a long time. When she finally answered, her voice was different, stripped of the armor, the sharpness, the careful control. "Your daughter crawled into my kitchen at 6 this morning. She was carrying that ridiculous one-eyed rabbit, and she walked right up to me and said, 'Are you lonely? Because you seem lonely. It's okay if you are. My dad's lonely too. He just won't admit it because he thinks it makes him weak.' And then she asked me if I had any cereal." Damien closed his eyes. "I'm going to have a conversation with her about boundaries." "Don't you dare. It was the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 10 years. The sun came through the barn door, catching dust motes in the air, making them glow like sparks. In the distance, Damien could hear Ellie's voice. She was outside somewhere with Marcus, and she was saying something about Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, in a voice that suggested she was taking the NATO alphabet very seriously. "I'm telling you because I don't have anyone to tell," Vivian said. "I have employees, I have security, I have a board of directors, and a team of lawyers, and a financial advisor who sends me quarterly reports I already understand better than he does. But I don't have anyone who just sits and listens without calculating what they can get from the conversation. You don't know me." "No, but your daughter does, and she trusts you, and she's the best judge of character I've met since Charlotte." That hit him somewhere in the chest. Not hard. Quiet. The kind of impact that doesn't bruise but settles deep and stays. They walked back toward the house together. The ranch was transformed in the daylight. What had been a dark, storm-battered landscape was now a sprawling property, stretching to the hills, with pastures, fence lines, outbuildings, and the kind of sky that West Texas does better than anywhere else. Enormous, cloudless, so blue it almost hurt. But Damien noticed other things too. The security cameras weren't just at the gate. They were everywhere. On the barn, on the stable, on every outbuilding, mounted on poles along the fence line, aimed inward as much as outward, as if the system was designed to watch the property's occupant as much as protect her. "How many cameras?" he asked. 47. Warren insisted on the system after I hired the attorney. He said it was for my protection. "And you think?" "I think surveillance and protection aren't the same thing." "No, they're not." Inside the house, they found Ellie in the library, which was a room the size of a small restaurant, with shelves reaching up 2 stories and a rolling ladder attached to a brass rail. She had arranged approximately 40 books in a semicircle on the floor around herself, and was sitting cross-legged in the center like a queen holding court. "I'm sorting," she announced. "I can see that," Damien said. "This pile is books with good covers and good titles. This pile is books with good covers but boring titles. This pile is books with boring covers but interesting titles. And this pile," she pointed to a single book set apart from the rest, "is a book about tax law that I think someone left here by accident because no human being would read this on purpose." Vivian picked up the tax law book. "This is mine, actually." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's the most boring book ever written. I read it twice." "Why?" "Because it saved me about $40 million. Ellie looked at the book with new respect. "Can I keep it?" "When you're older." Damien watched them together. There was something happening that he hadn't anticipated, a connection forming that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the two of them, with whatever frequency they were both tuned to. Ellie, who had grown up without a mother, and had learned to navigate the world with a combination of fierce intelligence and emotional radar that sometimes scared him. And Vivian, who had lost a sister and had spent 14 years building walls so high and thick that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone on the other side. In the afternoon, Vivian showed Ellie the horses. Damien hadn't known there were horses. There were 6 of them. 3 paints, 2 quarter horses, and 1 massive black mare that Ellie fell in love with instantly and completely. "What's her name?" Ellie asked, reaching through the fence, while Damien's hand hovered near her shoulder, ready to pull her back. "Nightfall," Vivian said. "She was Charlotte's. She was a foal when Charlotte was 11. They grew up together. She's beautiful. She's also mean. She's bitten 3 of my stable hands and kicked a fence post in half last month. She doesn't let anyone ride her. Maybe she's sad." Vivian looked at Ellie. "Maybe she is. Animals get sad when they lose their person. My teacher told us that. She said dogs sometimes wait at the door for years after their owner dies. Maybe Nightfall is waiting. For Charlotte? For anyone who feels like Charlotte." The late afternoon light turned the pasture gold. Vivian stood at the fence with her arms resting on the top rail, watching Nightfall watch Ellie. And Damien saw something he hadn't seen since they'd arrived. Vivian's shoulders drop. Not a lot, just an inch. The kind of small physical release that happens when someone stops bracing for impact, even for a moment. They ate dinner in the kitchen again. Vivian didn't attempt to cook this time. She pulled containers from the fridge, meals her staff had prepared before the storm, and heated them without incident. It was roast chicken, roasted vegetables, some kind of grain salad. Simple food, but good. Ellie ate with the dedication of a kid who'd spent the afternoon running around a ranch and was now refueling. "Marcus taught me the whole alphabet," she said between bites. "Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot." "We get it," Damien said. "Golf, hotel." "It's not golf," Marcus said from the doorway, where he was standing with his arms crossed. "It's golf." "That's what I said. You said it wrong." "Did not." "Did." Damien looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Damien. Something passed between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the shared recognition that Ellie had, in the span of 12 hours, done something that Vivian's money and authority and the weight of the Sinclair name had never accomplished. She'd made Marcus almost human. After dinner, Ellie fell asleep on the library couch with her head on a pillow that was probably worth more than Damien's truck. He carried her upstairs, put her in the guest bed, tucked the rabbit under her arm, and stood there for a moment doing the thing he did every night, cataloging her breathing, counting the seconds between each inhale, making sure the universe was still working the way it was supposed to. When he came back downstairs, Vivian was in the study. She was standing at the window again, same position as the night before, looking out at the darkness. But this time the darkness was quiet. No storm, no rain, just the vast West Texas night studded with stars that you could only see from places this far from anywhere. "She's asleep," Damien said. "Good." He should have gone to bed. The roof was finished. The roads might be clear by morning. There was nothing left to do here except sleep and leave. But he didn't go to bed. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been asking me things all day." "One more." She turned from the window. The fire had burned down to embers, and the room was lit mostly by a desk lamp that threw warm shadows across the bookshelves. She looked tired in a way that went beyond not sleeping. The kind of tired that settles into your bones over years, not hours. "Charlotte, you said she wrote letters?" "Yes." "To who?" Vivian sat down in the chair behind her desk. It was too big for her, a chair built for a larger person, probably her father, and she looked somehow younger sitting in it, like a kid playing at being an adult. "To everyone." Charlotte wrote letters constantly. To friends, to pen pals, to authors whose books she'd read, to politicians she disagreed with. She had this idea that if you wrote things down, they became real, like putting words on paper made them permanent, made them true. "Where are the letters?" "Most of them were sent. She mailed everything." "Most?" Vivian looked at him, that sharp, clinical look, but underneath it, something else. Something that might have been hope, and might have been fear, and might have been both. "After Charlotte died, I found a box under her bed. A shoebox. It had letters in it, ones she'd written but never sent. I was 17. I was destroyed. I couldn't function. I put the box in a closet and I didn't look at it for years. But you looked eventually. When I was 25, after my parents were both gone, after Warren had consolidated his control over the company, after I'd started to wonder, what was in them? Vivian opened a drawer in her desk. She pulled out a key, small, old-fashioned, the kind that opens a padlock, not a deadbolt. She held it up. Charlotte wrote a letter to me, dated 3 days before she died. She was 12, remember? 12 years old. And she wrote me a letter that said she'd seen something. At night, Uncle Warren in my father's office, going through files, moving papers. She said she watched him through the door crack. She said he was taking documents and putting them in his briefcase, and that when he left, he locked the office with a key that wasn't his. The room was very quiet. The embers in the fireplace popped once, twice. She said she was scared. She said she didn't know who to tell because Warren was family, and you're supposed to trust family. She said she was going to tell me when I got home from a school trip I was on that week. But she died before you got home. 3 days before, Damien sat down in the chair across from the desk. It was a leather chair, cracked and worn, and it creaked under his weight. You're telling me a 12-year-old girl caught your uncle stealing documents from your father's office, and 3 days later she drowned in a stock tank she'd been swimming in safely for 6 years. I'm telling you what the letter said. And you've been carrying this alone for how long? 7 years since I opened the box. Vivian, don't. Don't what? Don't look at me like that. Like I'm someone who needs to be fixed. I'm not broken. I'm careful. There's a difference. No, there isn't. Not when careful means you're living in a house full of cameras your uncle installed, surrounded by security you can't fully trust, holding a dead girl's letter in a locked drawer, and doing nothing about it because the man who might have killed her controls half your company. The words hung in the room. Damien hadn't meant to say them like that. Blunt, unfiltered, the way he talked to Ray when Ray was being stupid about something at the hardware store. But the words were out, and they were true. And Vivian was staring at him with an expression that looked like it had been hit by something it hadn't expected. You don't know anything about my situation. I know a cage when I see one. I've been in one myself for 4 years. Mine's made of medical debt and funeral costs and a town that's dying around me. Yours is made of money and marble floors and a security system that watches you sleep. But they're both cages. She stood up, walked to the fireplace, stood there with her back to him, her hands gripping the mantel. If I move against Warren, he'll destroy me. He's told me that. Not in those words. He doesn't make threats. He makes observations. It would be unfortunate if certain information became public. The board would have concerns if they knew about certain vulnerabilities. He has files on me. Things from when I was younger, when I was making mistakes, when I was lost, after Charlotte, after my mother. He collected everything. What kind of things? Does it matter? He has them. That's the point. He has enough to remove me from the board, to freeze my assets, to turn every business partner I have against me. He's been building this for years. It's what he does. He doesn't attack. He accumulates. And then he waits. Damien thought about his army training, about the way certain operations were designed, not as direct assaults, but as sieges. Slow strangulation, cut off the supply lines, control the information, isolate the target from allies, and wait until they surrender or collapse. That was what Warren Sinclair had built around his niece. Not a prison with bars, a prison with leverage. Charlotte's letter, he said. Is that the only evidence? I don't know. I never had the resources to find out. Every time I tried to investigate, something happened. The attorney. Then a private investigator I hired. He returned my retainer after 2 weeks and said the case wasn't worth pursuing. Then a journalist I contacted. She published one story about Sinclair Holdings' financial irregularities and was fired from her paper within a month. He has reach. He has reach, he has money, he has patience, and he has the thing that makes all of that work. He has the appearance of respectability. Warren Sinclair donates to hospitals. He sits on charity boards. He shakes hands with governors. He's the kind of man who destroys people on Monday and gives a speech about integrity on Tuesday, and nobody sees the contradiction because nobody's looking. Damien was quiet for a long time. The fire was almost out. Through the window, the stars burned in the vast black sky. "You asked me earlier why I was telling you all this," Vivian said, still facing the fireplace. "The real answer isn't because your daughter was honest with me. That's part of it. But the real answer is that I'm tired, Damien. I'm so tired of carrying this alone that I would tell a stranger in a barn if he was the only person who stood still long enough to listen. And that's pathetic. I know it's pathetic. I'm a grown woman worth more money than I can spend in 5 lifetimes, and I'm standing in my dead father's study telling a man I met 12 hours ago about a murder I can't prove and a family I can't escape. It's not pathetic. What would you call it?" He thought about it. Thought about the nights after Sarah died when he'd sat in his truck in the driveway after Ellie was asleep and talked to no one. Just talked. To the dashboard. To the windshield. To the dark. Because the words had to go somewhere, and there was nobody to receive them, and silence was heavier than sound. "I'd call it surviving," he said, "and there's nothing pathetic about it. The pathetic thing would be not talking at all. Keeping it in until it eats you from the inside. That's what happened to my wife. Not the cancer, but before the cancer. She kept her pain quiet because she thought she was protecting me. By the time she finally told me something was wrong, it was already too late for a lot of things." Vivian turned around. Her eyes were wet. Not crying. She wasn't the kind of person who cried easily, he could tell. But the tears were there, sitting right on the edge, held back by the same force of will that held back everything else. "I don't know what to do," she said. "Yeah," Damien said. "That's usually where the good decisions start." They stayed up talking until almost 3 in the morning. Not about Warren, not about Charlotte, not about the company or the cameras or the leverage. About other things. Smaller things. The kind of things you share when you're too exhausted to perform and too invested to stop. Vivian talked about college, Stanford, full ride, because the Sinclairs didn't do anything halfway, and how she'd spent 4 years studying business while secretly wanting to study veterinary science. She talked about the first time she'd fired someone, how she'd gone to the bathroom afterward and thrown up. She talked about the way the ranch looked in October, when the mesquite turned gold and the sky went from blue to purple in the evenings, and the coyotes sang in the hills, and she could almost forget that everything she owned was built on something rotten. Damien talked about Sarah, about how they'd met at a welding supply store in Odessa. She'd been buying steel rods for a sculpture she was making in her community college art class, and he'd helped her load them into her car, and she'd looked at him and said, "You carry things well. You must practice." About how she'd laughed at her own jokes and cried during dog food commercials and made the worst chili in Texas and insisted it was a secret family recipe. About how Ellie had her laugh and her stubbornness and her ability to walk into a room and make it feel like the room had been waiting for her. They didn't touch. They didn't move closer. They sat in their respective chairs in the dying firelight and talked like people who'd been carrying weight alone for too long and had finally found someone willing to stand close enough to see how heavy it was. Around 3:15, Vivian's eyes closed mid-sentence. She caught herself, opened them, shook her head. "Go to bed," Damien said. "I don't sleep well in this house." "Try." She stood, walked to the door, stopped, turned back. She kept doing that. The half-exit, the return. And he was starting to understand it wasn't indecision. It was the behavior of someone who'd been alone so long that leaving a conversation felt like losing something. "Tomorrow," she said, "when the road's clear, you're going to leave." That was the plan. "And you're going to take your daughter and your toolbox and your dying truck and go back to Hargrove and pretend this didn't happen." That was also the plan. She looked at him, tired, raw. The $4 billion woman standing barefoot in a doorway, stripped of everything except the truth. "What if I asked you to stay?" The question filled the room. Damien felt it land in his chest, heavy, warm, terrifying. "For how long?" "I don't know. Long enough to... I don't know." "That's not a plan, Vivian." "I know. And I have a kid. I have a life, such as it is." "I know that too." He looked at her. She looked at him. The fire was dead now, just ash and the faint glow of the last ember. "Let me think about it," he said. "Fair." She left. For real this time. No half-turn, no return. Just the sound of her footsteps on the stone floor, moving down the hallway, growing softer, and then a door closing somewhere deep in the house. Damien sat in the leather chair for a long time. He could hear the ranch settling around him, the tick of cooling pipes, the distant sound of the new generator humming behind its repaired walls, the creak of old timber adjusting to the absence of wind. He pulled out his phone. No signal still. But the Notes app worked, and he opened it and typed a single line. Not because he was going to do anything with it, but because, like Charlotte, he believed that writing things down made them real. She asked me to stay. He deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again. Then he went upstairs, lay down next to his sleeping daughter, and stared at the ceiling until the first gray light of morning crept through windows that cost more than his annual income. And the ranch woke up around him like something that had been holding its breath all night and was finally, reluctantly, starting to breathe. He stayed. Not because she asked, at least that's what he told himself during those first few days, that the decision was practical, financial, the kind of cold calculation a man with an empty bank account and a daughter who needed things had to make. Vivian offered him a contract, legitimate work, structural repairs on the ranch's aging outbuildings, welding jobs that had been piling up for months because nobody she hired lasted long enough to finish them. $2,000 a week, plus room and board for him and Ellie, plus access to the ranch's workshop and welding equipment. It was more money than he'd seen in years. It was also, and he knew this even as he shook her hand in the study on the morning the roads finally cleared, the kind of arrangement that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the way Vivian Sinclair looked at his daughter like she was seeing someone who'd been gone for 14 years. Ray Munoz had opinions about it. "You're out of your mind," Ray said when Damien called him from the ranch landline, because cell service was still a fantasy this far out. "Nobody stays at Sinclair Ranch, Damien. The last guy who took a long-term job there quit after 3 weeks and wouldn't tell anyone why. Just packed his stuff and drove to El Paso and got a job at a car wash." A car wash. You know how scared you have to be to choose a car wash over $2,000 a week? I'm not scared. That's because you don't know enough yet to be scared. Thanks for the encouragement, Ray. I'm not encouraging you. I'm telling you that the Sinclair family has a history that goes back 30 years, and none of it is good, and the parts that aren't bad are worse. Warren Sinclair alone. Do you know what that man did to the Hendricks family when they tried to dispute a land survey? He buried them in litigation for 4 years. 4 years, Damien. They lost their ranch, lost everything. And Warren did it from a golf course in San Antonio without breaking a sweat. I know about Warren. You don't know about Warren. You know what Warren lets people know. There's a difference. There's a big difference. Damien thought about the phone call he'd overheard during the storm, the voice in the study. Decisions that cost things. He thought about Charlotte's letter in the locked drawer. He thought about 47 cameras watching a woman who was supposedly their owner. "I'll be careful," he said. Famous last words. He hung up and went to find Ellie, who was in the stable with Vivian, standing at the fence rail, talking to Nightfall in a low, steady voice that she said was her hoarse, whispering voice, and that Damien said was just her regular voice, but quieter. "She let me touch her nose," Ellie announced. "Nightfall hasn't let anyone touch her in 3 years," Vivian said, and there was something in her voice, a crack, thin as a hair, running through the careful surface. "Maybe she was waiting for the right person," Ellie said. "Maybe." The first week passed in a rhythm that surprised Damien with its normalcy. He worked during the day, repairing fence brackets along the south pasture, re-welding the support beams on the equipment shed, fixing a corroded water line that ran from the main well to the horse stable. The ranch was massive, over 9,000 acres, and years of deferred maintenance had left it scarred, rusted joints, crumbling foundations, gates that hung crooked on bent hinges. It was the kind of work he understood in his bones, the kind of work that had clear problems and clear solutions, where you could see progress at the end of each day in the form of something that stood straighter, or held tighter, or didn't leak anymore. Ellie, meanwhile, had colonized the library. Vivian had given her unrestricted access to the bookshelves, all of them, including the ones on the second level that required the rolling ladder, and Ellie had responded by building what she called her reading fortress, a semi-permanent installation of cushions, blankets, and strategically positioned books that occupied the entire southeast corner of the room. "She's reading at a 6th grade level," Vivian told Damien one evening, standing in the library doorway, watching Ellie work through a book about marine biology. "Maybe higher." "Her teachers say she's advanced." "Advanced is an understatement. She asked me yesterday what compound interest was. When I explained it, she said, so it's basically money having babies, which is actually a more accurate description than most economics textbooks give." Damien watched his daughter from across the room. She was mouthing the words as she read, her lips moving slightly, the way Sarah used to do. He hadn't noticed her doing that before. "She reminds you of Charlotte," he said. It wasn't a question. Vivian didn't answer it like one. Charlotte used to do that, build nests. She called them her thinking spots. She'd pile blankets and books and pillows into a corner and sit there for hours, reading, writing her letters. My mother used to say Charlotte was building herself a second world because the first one wasn't interesting enough. Was it? No, the first world was full of adults keeping secrets and pretending everything was fine. Charlotte knew it wasn't fine. She was 12 and she knew more about what was happening in this family than most of the adults did. Vivian paused. That's what got her killed. It was the first time she'd used that word. Not died, not drowned, killed. Damien looked at her. She looked back at him, and there was no armor in her expression, no clinical distance, just the raw face of a woman who had spent 14 years holding a truth she couldn't prove and couldn't release. "I know what I said," she told him. "Yeah, you do." The second week was when things started to shift. It began with Warren. Damien was underneath the waterline junction near the east fence, a job that required him to lie on his back in a shallow trench and weld a corroded coupling while mud seeped into his clothes, when a black SUV pulled through the main gate. Not Marcus's vehicle, a different one. Bigger, newer, with tinted windows so dark they looked painted on. He watched from the trench as the SUV pulled up to the main house. A man got out of the back seat, not the driver, a passenger. Tall, late 60s. Silver hair cut short, a navy suit that looked wrong on a ranch in the same way a tuxedo looks wrong at a gas station. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who owns the ground he's walking on, or at least believes he does, which amounts to the same thing. Warren Sinclair. Damien had never seen him in person, only heard the voice through rain-streaked glass. But he recognized the posture, the proprietary way the man looked at the property as he walked toward the front door, not with admiration, not with nostalgia, but with the cold assessment of someone calculating value. A second man got out of the SUV, younger, thick, wearing the same kind of tactical clothing Marcus wore. He stayed by the vehicle, arms crossed, eyes scanning the property behind dark sunglasses. Damien pulled himself out of the trench and headed for the house. He found Marcus in the hallway outside the study, standing with his back against the wall and his jaw tight. "Warren's here," Damien said. "I noticed." "Is that normal?" Marcus looked at him. The security man's face was its usual blank slate, but something in his eyes was different, a tension that hadn't been there before. "He comes when he comes. He doesn't announce it." "And that doesn't bother you?" "What bothers me isn't your concern." Through the study door, Damien could hear voices. Vivian's, controlled and tense. Warren's, measured, expansive. The voice of a man who is making a speech more than having a conversation. "Simply asking you to reconsider the Permian Basin leases. The board has concerns about the timeline, and frankly, Vivian, your unwillingness to discuss this in a formal setting is creating an impression that you're not what? Not cooperative? Not obedient? Not focused. That's the word I'd use. The board would say you're distracted. They'd point to the fact that you're out here, on this ranch, instead of in Dallas or Houston, where the actual business is being conducted. They'd mention the spending. This property alone costs $400,000 a year to maintain. And the return is, this property is mine. Not the company's. Mine. Everything is connected, sweetheart. That's what your father understood. Personal assets, corporate assets. The distinction is a formality. When the family thrives, you thrive. When you isolate yourself, the family suffers. The word sweetheart made Damien's hands tighten into fists, not because of what it meant, but because of how it was used. Like a leash, like a tool, like a word designed to make a 30-year-old woman feel like a child who didn't know her place. "I need to go in there," Damien said. Marcus shook his head. "No. I know what he's doing, and she can handle it. She's been handling it for years. That doesn't mean she should have to." Marcus studied him for a long moment. Something shifted in the security man's expression, the first real emotion Damien had seen there. Not warmth, exactly. Recognition. The look of someone who's been waiting for another person to see what they've been seeing alone. "You care about her," Marcus said. "I care about people who are being cornered." Same thing, in this case. The study door opened. Warren Sinclair stepped out. He was exactly what Damien had expected, and nothing like what he'd expected, both at once. Up close, he looked like money. The kind of groomed, maintained, carefully preserved appearance that came from decades of expensive haircuts, tailored clothing, and the particular confidence that grows in people who've never been told no by anyone who mattered. But his eyes were wrong. They were blue and clear and completely empty, the way a camera lens is empty, recording everything, feeling nothing. Warren saw Damien, stopped, looked him over with the quick, dismissive efficiency of a man who categorized people into two groups, useful and irrelevant. "You must be the repairman." "I am. Good work on the generator housing. I reviewed the repairs." "Thank you. How long will you be staying?" "As long as the work takes." Warren smiled. It was the worst smile Damien had ever seen. Technically perfect, engaging every muscle in the face, producing an expression that looked like warmth the way a mannequin looks like a person. "That's a very open-ended arrangement. My niece has a habit of taking in strays. It's a generous impulse, but it creates complications. I'm sure you understand." "I'm not a stray. I'm a contractor." Of course you are." Warren adjusted his cuffs. "Where's your daughter? Vivian mentioned she was here." Every nerve in Damien's body fired at once. The question was casual, almost throwaway, the kind of thing any polite adult might ask. But something about the way Warren said daughter, the way his mouth shaped the word, the way his eyes stayed fixed on Damien's face while he said it, watching for a reaction the way a poker player watches for a tell, set off alarms that Damien hadn't felt since the army. "She's reading," Damien said. "Lovely. Children should read. My niece Charlotte was a reader, before her accident." The word accident dropped into the hallway like a stone into still water. "I should get back to work," Damien said. "By all means." Warren walked past him. His cologne was expensive and faint, the kind that lingered in a room after you'd left it, claiming the space even when you weren't in it anymore. At the front door, he paused and looked back. "Mr. Carter, a word of advice from someone who's been part of this family for a very long time. The ranch is a beautiful place, but it's not a home. It's an asset. And assets work best when they're managed properly, by people who understand their value, not by people who are passing through." He left. The SUV pulled away. The black-tinted windows caught the sunlight and threw it back, sharp as a blade. Damien found Vivian in the study. She was sitting behind the desk. Her father's desk, her father's chair, her father's room, and her hands were flat on the surface, palms down, like she was trying to hold herself to the earth. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Then why did you ask?" He sat down in the cracked leather chair across from her. The same chair where they'd sat 2 weeks ago, talking until 3 in the morning, sharing the kind of things you share with strangers who don't feel like strangers. What did he want? What he always wants. Control. Compliance. He wants me to sign off on the Permian Basin leases. They're worth about $200 million, and the board wants to fast-track them. And I've been stalling because the environmental impact assessment is incomplete, and the drilling plan has gaps that nobody wants to discuss. Is that the real reason you're stalling? She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? I mean, are you stalling because of the environmental assessment, or are you stalling because saying no to Warren is the only power you have left and you're not willing to give it up? The sharpness in her expression didn't fade, but it changed, transformed from defensive to something more complicated. The look of someone being seen more clearly than they're comfortable with. Both, she said. It's both. And I hate that you can tell. I'm not that perceptive. You're just not as hidden as you think you are. That's a terrible thing to say to someone whose entire survival strategy is being hidden. He leaned forward. Vivian. He asked about Ellie. The change was immediate. Vivian's hands went from flat on the desk to fists. Her chin came up, her eyes narrowed, and for a moment Damien saw the woman the business magazines wrote about. Not cold, not calculating, but fierce. The difference between a wall and a weapon. What exactly did he say? He asked where she was. Then he mentioned Charlotte. In the same sentence? Close enough. Vivian stood up. She walked to the window, but this time she wasn't looking at the landscape. She was looking at the driveway, at the place where the SUV had been, like she could still see it there. He does that. He drops Charlotte's name into conversations like a test, to see how I react, to remind me that he was there when she died and I wasn't, to make sure I understand that he knows things about that day that I don't, and that knowledge, that specific knowledge, is leverage. Does he know about the letter? I don't think so. If he did, he'd have taken it years ago. Where's it now? Not in this house? Not anymore. I moved it after I read it. It's in a safe deposit box in a bank in Midland under a name Warren doesn't know I use. Smart. Careful. The moves of a woman who'd been playing defense for so long that she'd become expert at it. But defense wasn't the same as safety, and expert wasn't the same as free. You need to do something with it, Damien said. The letter, whatever else Charlotte wrote. You can't just keep it in a box forever. I know. Knowing and doing aren't the same thing. Yes, you said that before. You seem to like saying things that are true and obvious and completely unhelpful. It's a gift. Despite everything, despite Warren's visit, despite the tension still vibrating in the room like a struck wire, Vivian's mouth twitched. Not a smile, the memory of one. That night, Damien couldn't sleep again. He lay in the guest bed, which he'd stopped thinking of as a guest bed and started thinking of as his bed, a fact that troubled him, and listened to the ranch settle around him. Ellie was asleep beside him, her breathing steady, the rabbit wedged between her arm and her rib cage. He kept thinking about Warren's eyes, that camera lens emptiness. He'd seen eyes like that before, in the army, in men who'd done things that disconnected them from the normal human wiring, the circuitry that makes you flinch when you see pain, that makes you hesitate before causing it. Warren Sinclair wasn't a man who caused pain carelessly. He was a man who caused pain efficiently, with purpose, the way an engineer demolishes a building. Not out of anger, but because the building was in the way of something he wanted to construct. And now Warren knew Damien's name, knew his daughter's name, knew he was here. Around midnight, Damien got up and went downstairs. He wasn't looking for Vivian, but he found her anyway. In the kitchen, sitting at the island with her laptop open and a glass of wine she hadn't touched. Can't sleep either? She said without looking up. Habit. Same. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. The kitchen was dark except for the laptop's glow and the small light over the stove. Vivian's face was lit from below, making her look angular, older, carved from something harder than skin. I've been going through the company's financial records, she said, trying to find the pattern. Warren's been moving money for years, small amounts, through subsidiary accounts, through entities I can barely trace. It's not embezzlement, exactly. It's more like repositioning. He's building something outside the main company structure, a parallel portfolio. Shell companies in Delaware, LLCs in Wyoming, land trusts in Nevada. All technically legal, all technically separate from Sinclair Holdings, all technically nothing I can challenge him on. But the timing. Every major movement happens right after a board meeting, right after a decision I make that he disagrees with. It's like he's siphoning, not stealing, siphoning, taking pieces of the empire and moving them somewhere I can't reach, so that by the time I finally do confront him, there won't be enough left to fight over. Damien thought about that, about the patience it took, the planning, the years of quiet maneuvering, about a man who had found a 12-year-old girl watching him through a door crack and had decided, with the same cold calculation, that the risk was unacceptable. Charlotte saw something like this, Damien said. She saw him in the office, taking documents. 14 years ago. He's been doing this for 14 years, maybe longer. And I can't prove any of it because the records Charlotte might have seen are gone, destroyed or buried or moved to wherever he keeps the things that protect him. What about the documents themselves, the ones he took from your father's office? My father died 8 years ago. His files were transferred to Warren's control as part of the trust arrangement. Everything my father built, the records, the contracts, the original agreements, all of it went to Warren, legally, properly, with signatures and notarizations and the full cooperation of a legal system that doesn't ask questions when the check's clear. Damien sat down across from her. The kitchen island between them was the size of a conference table, polished granite, cold under his forearms. There has to be something he missed, something Charlotte left behind that isn't in the letter. Like what? You said she wrote letters constantly, to everyone. What if she wrote to someone about what she saw? A friend, a teacher, a pen pal. What if there's a copy of something out there that Warren doesn't know about? Vivian looked at him. The laptop light caught her eyes, and for a moment they looked wet again. That edge of tears shine that she controlled with the same iron discipline she controlled everything else. Charlotte's best friend was a girl named Elena Reyes. They were inseparable. Elena's family moved to San Antonio about a year after Charlotte died. I haven't spoken to her since. Do you know where she is now? I could find out. I have resources for that. Then find out. It's not that simple. It is that simple. You find Elena Reyes. You ask her if Charlotte ever sent her anything. A letter, a note, a drawing, anything. You gather whatever exists, and then you take it, along with the letter in the safe deposit box, and you find a lawyer who isn't in Warren's pocket, and you start building a case. And what happens when Warren finds out? What happens when the cameras catch us having this conversation? When his people, and he has people everywhere, Damien, everywhere, report back that his niece is asking questions again? Then we deal with it. We? The word hung in the kitchen. Damien heard it, heard the way it sounded, possessive, committed, the word of a man who'd already made a decision he hadn't announced yet. Yeah, he said. We. Vivian closed the laptop. The kitchen went darker. In the reduced light, he could see her more clearly somehow. Not her features, but her expression. The way her face looked when the screens and the business and the armor were stripped away. She looked. He searched for the right word, and the only one that came was young. She looked young and tired and scared and trying very hard not to be any of those things. You're a welder from a dying town, she said. You have a daughter who depends on you. You have nothing to gain from this and everything to lose. That's all true. So why? He thought about it. Not for effect. He actually thought about it, turning the question over the way he turned a piece of steel in his hands before cutting it, looking for the grain, the stress points, the places where it would hold and the places where it would break. Because my wife died and I couldn't do anything about it, he said. I stood there and watched, and there was nothing I could do. No amount of work, no amount of money, no amount of anything could change what was happening. And I've spent 4 years carrying that. The uselessness of it, the helplessness. And now I'm standing in a kitchen with a woman who's been living with the same feeling for 14 years. And the difference between your situation and Sarah's cancer is that yours has a person attached to it, a person who made a choice, a person who can be held accountable. He paused. I can't bring Sarah back. I can't undo what happened to her, but this thing with Warren, with Charlotte, this is something that can be fixed. Not easily, not cleanly, but it can be fixed. And I'd rather spend my energy on something fixable than spend the rest of my life repairing fences and pretending that's enough. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, one of the horses made a sound. Low, questioning, the kind of noise animals make in the dark when they hear something they can't identify. Okay, Vivian said. Okay? Okay, we do this. But we do it carefully, and we do it together, and the first time my daughter, your daughter, is in any danger, we stop. Immediately. Non-negotiable. He noticed the slip. My daughter. She'd caught it too. He could tell by the way she stiffened slightly, the way her eyes flickered away and then came back. Agreed, he said. And Damien? Yeah? If this goes wrong, If Warren retaliates, if it falls apart, I need you to take Ellie and leave. Don't look back. Don't try to be a hero. Just go. I'm not going to promise that. I'm asking you to. And I'm telling you no. Because the kind of man who makes that promise is the kind of man who keeps it. And the kind of man who keeps it is the kind of man who drives away while the woman who trusted him is left standing in the wreckage. And I'm not that man. My father was that man. He left my mother standing in wreckage he created and drove away and drank himself into a grave in a trailer park in Odessa. I will not do that. The words came out harder than he intended. He heard his own voice, rough, cracked, carrying weight he usually kept buried. And he saw the impact on Vivian's face. Not fear, not pity. Something else. Something that looked dangerously like the beginning of trust. You're stubborn, she said. Runs in the family. Just ask the rabbit. She almost laughed. Almost. The sound died in her throat, but the shape of it stayed on her face. A softening, a crack in the concrete, a hairline fracture through which something warm and living and vulnerable was trying to push through. 3 days later, Vivian found Elena Reyes. She was living in San Antonio, working as a middle school counselor. 26 years old, unmarried. She'd kept a low profile since her family left the area after Charlotte's death, moved to a different school district, different neighborhood, different life. The kind of deliberate disappearance that suggested someone had been told or paid or frightened into staying away. Vivian made the call from the barn using a prepaid phone Damien had bought in Marfa during a supply run, because the ranch phones, like everything else on the property, were on a system that Warren's people had installed and possibly monitored. Damien stood outside the barn door, watching the driveway, watching the cameras, watching for the black SUV that might or might not be coming. Inside, he could hear Vivian's voice, careful, controlled, but underneath the control, shaking. Elena, it's Vivian. Vivian Sinclair. I know it's been a long time. I know this is unexpected, but I need to talk to you about Charlotte. Silence. Then, faintly, a voice on the other end. Damien couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the tone, startled, wary, the voice of someone who'd answered a phone and found a ghost on the other end. Vivian talked for 20 minutes. When she came out of the barn, her face was pale and her hands were shaking, and she was holding the prepaid phone so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She has letters, Vivian said. Charlotte's letters. 11 of them. Charlotte sent Elena letters for the last year of her life. Elena kept them, all of them. Her mother told her to throw them away after they moved, but she didn't. She hid them. She's had them in a box in her closet for 14 years. What's in them? Elena wouldn't say over the phone. She's scared, Damien. She's been scared for 14 years. She said after Charlotte died, a man came to their house, didn't identify himself, didn't leave a name, just told Elena's father that the Sinclair family valued their privacy and that it would be best for everyone if certain friendships and their associated correspondence were put behind them. Her father moved the family to San Antonio the next month. Warren. She didn't say the name, but she described him. Silver hair, blue eyes, a smile that didn't work right. Damien felt it, the same cold that had settled into him the night of the storm, the night he'd first heard Warren's voice through the study window. The architecture of control. The patient, systematic work of a man who left nothing to chance and no loose end untied. Except he'd missed one. A 12-year-old girl with a box of letters and a friend who was stubborn enough to keep them hidden for 14 years. We need those letters, Damien said. I know. Elena agreed to meet, in person, but not here. She won't come anywhere near this ranch. We meet in San Antonio, this weekend. Both of us? She asked for that, actually. She said she doesn't trust the Sinclairs, any of them, but she trusts that a man with a daughter wouldn't be part of whatever happened to Charlotte. He looked at Vivian. She looked at him. The afternoon sun was behind her, and for a moment her face was in shadow, unreadable, just the outline of a woman standing in a barn doorway with a phone full of secrets and a dead sister's voice echoing through 14 years of silence. There's something else, Vivian said. What? Elena said Charlotte called her the night before she died, late, after midnight. Charlotte was whispering, like she was afraid someone would hear. She told Elena she'd taken something, from Warren's briefcase. something he'd left in the ranch house office. What did she take? Elena doesn't know. Charlotte wouldn't say on the phone. She said she was going to hide it somewhere safe and that she'd tell Vivian, tell me, when I got home from my school trip. She said it was important. She said it would change everything. The barn creaked around them. Horses shifted in their stalls. The wind picked up outside, carrying dust across the pasture in low brown waves. Charlotte took evidence from Warren's briefcase, Damien said slowly. And then she died. And whatever she took, whatever she hid, is either still hidden somewhere on this property or Warren found it and destroyed it. If he'd found it, he wouldn't still be afraid. What makes you think he's afraid? Because he's still watching. After 14 years, he's still watching. The cameras, the visits, the constant pressure to sign things and stay in line and not ask questions. You don't maintain that level of control over someone unless you're afraid of what happens when you lose it. She was right. Damien knew she was right because he'd seen it. In the army, in the behavior of commanding officers who covered up mistakes. The cover-up was always more work than the crime. The maintenance of the lie required more energy than the lie itself. And the people who maintained lies that big, for that long, were always, underneath all the confidence and the control and the expensive suits, terrified. We go to San Antonio, Damien said. We get the letters. And then we figure out what Charlotte hid. And Warren? Warren doesn't know what we're doing, not yet. He'll find out. Then we better be ready when he does. That night, Damien checked on Ellie 3 times. She was asleep each time, deeply, peacefully, the way children sleep when they don't know what the adults around them are carrying. The rabbit was tucked under her arm. Her shoes were lined up neatly beside the bed. Her library book was open face down on the nightstand, holding her page. She was 8 years old. She was the best thing he'd ever done. And he was about to walk into something that could put her at risk because a woman he'd known for 3 weeks had shown him a photograph of a dead girl and asked him, without asking, to care about something bigger than his own survival. He sat on the edge of the bed and watched her breathe. In, out, in, out. The steady rhythm of a child who trusted her father completely, who believed that the world was manageable because he was in it, who didn't know that her father was sitting in the dark making decisions that could either save them or destroy everything. He touched her hair. She stirred, murmured something about the horse, and settled back into sleep. Down the hall, in the study, Vivian Sinclair was sitting behind her dead father's desk, holding a key to a safe deposit box in Midland, reading financial records on her laptop, building a map of her uncle's empire within an empire, and wondering. He knew she was wondering because he was wondering the same thing, whether the truth was worth the cost of finding it. Outside, the cameras recorded everything. The red lights blinked in the darkness, patient, steady, unwavering, watching the gates, watching the fences, watching the house where a billionaire and a welder and an 8-year-old girl with a one-eyed rabbit were sleeping or trying to, while somewhere in San Antonio, a woman named Elena Reyes sat in her apartment with a box of letters in her lap, and 14 years of silence pressing against her teeth like a scream. The drive to San Antonio took 6 hours. Damien's truck made every one of those hours feel like a negotiation. The transmission slipping on grades, the engine running hot through the long, flat stretches east of Fort Stockton, the steering pulling to the right with a persistence that suggested the alignment wasn't so much off as actively hostile. Ellie sat in the back seat reading a book about ocean creatures that Vivian had given her from the library. Vivian sat in the passenger seat with her sunglasses on and her hands in her lap, and her body so still that she might have been carved from something, except that every 20 minutes or so she'd exhale. A long, slow, controlled breath that sounded like someone releasing pressure from a valve before something exploded. They'd left before dawn. Marcus had argued against it. You're driving 6 hours in a truck that should have been scrapped 2 years ago, with no security, no backup, and no way for me to reach you if something goes wrong. That's the point, Vivian had said. If you can't reach me, neither can Warren. You're assuming Warren doesn't already know. I'm assuming Warren doesn't know yet. There's a difference, and the difference is a window, and I'm going through it. Marcus had looked at Damien with an expression that said very clearly, if anything happens to her, I will end you. Damien had looked back with an expression that said equally clearly, understood. They'd brought the prepaid phone. They'd left their regular phones at the ranch, powered on, sitting on the kitchen counter, creating the impression that everyone was home and nothing was happening. Vivian had suggested it, and Damien had been impressed by the thinking until he realized that this kind of thinking, the security calculus, the constant awareness of being watched, and the constant effort to manipulate the watchers, was just how Vivian's mind worked. Not because she was paranoid, because her life had taught her that paranoia was just pattern recognition for people who'd been burned. Ellie, blissfully unaware of any of this, provided commentary on the journey. "There's a dead cow." "Don't look at the dead cow," Damien said. "Too late. It's very dead. Like extremely dead." "Ellie, why is Texas so flat? Is the whole state flat? Who decided this was a good place to live?" "People who liked space," Vivian said. "There's too much space. Space is overrated. I'd rather have a Dairy Queen." "There's one in Junction. Can we stop?" Damien looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Damien. They were both exhausted, both wired, both carrying the weight of what they were driving toward, and somehow this 8-year-old's request for ice cream cut through all of it like a blade through paper. "Yeah," Damien said. "We can stop." They stopped in Junction. Ellie got a blizzard. Vivian ordered a plain vanilla cone, and Damien watched her eat it while standing in a parking lot next to a truck that was leaking transmission fluid onto the asphalt, wearing a baseball cap she'd borrowed from Marcus and jeans that probably cost more than everything in this Dairy Queen combined, and looking, for the first time since he'd met her, like someone who wasn't calculating anything at all. "You've got ice cream on your nose," Ellie said. Vivian wiped it off with the back of her hand. "No, I don't." "You did. I saw it." "Then it never happened." "That's not how truth works." "It is if you own the newspaper." Ellie laughed. Vivian almost did. Damien ate his dipped cone and thought about how strange it was that the three of them, a broke welder, a billionaire, and an 8-year-old with a one-eyed rabbit, had somehow become something that felt, against all logic, like a unit. Not a family. Not yet. Not anything with a name or a definition, just a group of people who had, through accident and storm and stubbornness, ended up in the same orbit. They reached San Antonio at 2 in the afternoon. Elena Reyes lived in a small apartment complex on the south side of the city, in a neighborhood that was working class and honest about it. Chain-link fences, small yards, cars parked on the street because the garages had been converted to extra rooms. It reminded Damien of Hargrove, of home. Vivian took off the sunglasses, looked at the apartment building. Her hands were back in her lap, and the stillness was back too. That controlled immobility that Damien had learned to read as fear wearing the costume of composure. "I haven't seen her since the funeral," Vivian said. "She was 12. I was 17. I remember she wore a blue dress, and she couldn't stop crying, and her mother kept trying to pull her away from the casket, and she kept going back. That was 14 years ago. It feels like last week." "I know." He did know. Sarah's funeral felt like last week too. Grief didn't respect calendars. It sat wherever it wanted and stayed as long as it liked and occasionally moved aside just enough to let you function before settling back into place like it owned the chair. "Ellie stays in the truck," Vivian said. "Agreed." They left Ellie with her book and strict instructions. Doors locked, windows up, don't open for anyone, don't go anywhere. Ellie gave them the look she gave when adults told her things she'd already figured out herself. "I'm 8, not stupid." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Damien said. "They kind of are." The apartment was on the second floor. Vivian knocked. There was a long pause, 30 seconds, maybe more. And then the door opened. Elena Reyes was 26 but looked younger. Small, dark-haired, with the cautious posture of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for so long that it had changed the way she stood. She looked at Vivian first, a long, searching look. The kind that was trying to match a face to a memory from half a lifetime ago. And then at Damien, with the quick assessment of someone deciding whether a stranger was safe. "Come in," she said. The apartment was small and clean and full of the particular order that comes from a person who controls their environment because they can't control anything else. Books on shelves, alphabetized, dishes washed and put away, a couch with cushions arranged precisely. On the coffee table, a shoebox. The shoebox. Elena saw them looking at it. I got it out last night. After you called. I haven't opened it in, I don't know, 5 years? 6? I used to read them all the time when I first moved here. I'd read them and cry and read them again. Then I stopped. Not because I forgot, because reading them kept her alive in a way that made it harder to keep living. Vivian sat down on the edge of the couch. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like someone sitting down next to a bomb. Thank you for keeping them, Elena. I couldn't throw them away. My mother asked me to. She said it was healthier. She said Charlotte was gone and holding on to letters wasn't going to bring her back. But I couldn't. They were Charlotte's words. Her handwriting, the way she dotted her I's with little circles, the way she underlined words she thought were important. Throwing them away would have been like erasing her. I know. Do you? Because you never called, you never wrote, you never came. In 14 years, Vivian, not once. The accusation landed, and Vivian took it. She didn't defend herself, didn't explain, didn't offer excuses about Warren, or fear, or the architecture of control that had kept her isolated on a ranch surrounded by cameras. She just sat there and absorbed it, the way a boxer absorbs a punch they know they deserve. You're right, Vivian said. I should have. I was afraid. Not of you. Of what finding you would mean. Of what it would start. Because once I started looking for the truth, I couldn't stop, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to see it through. Are you sure now? Vivian looked at Damien. He didn't say anything, didn't nod, didn't signal, didn't give her permission or encouragement, just looked back. This was her decision. It had always been her decision. No, Vivian said. I'm not sure. But I'm tired of being afraid, and that's close enough. Elena opened the shoebox. Inside were 11 letters, folded neatly, written on the kind of lined notebook paper that middle schoolers use. Each one was addressed to Elena in handwriting that was neat and round and achingly young. The handwriting of a girl who was 12 and thought she had all the time in the world to learn cursive properly. Elena handed the box to Vivian. Vivian took it with both hands, holding it the way you hold something fragile and explosive at the same time. Most of them are normal, Elena said. Normal kid stuff. School, horses, books she was reading, a boy in her class she thought was cute. But the last 3, said, the ones from the final month, those are different. Vivian opened the first of the final 3 letters. Damien watched her read it, watched her face go white, then whiter, then a color that wasn't really a color at all. The absence of color, the look of someone whose blood has decided to leave their extremities and go somewhere safer. She handed it to Damien. The letter was dated 6 weeks before Charlotte died. The handwriting was the same, round, careful, young, but the tone was different. Gone was the chatty 12-year-old talking about horses and homework. In her place was a girl who was scared and trying very hard to sound brave. Elena, the letter read, something weird is happening at the ranch. I told you about Uncle Warren being in Dad's office that night. I thought maybe he was just looking for something normal, like business papers or whatever. But I watched again last night, and he was doing the same thing. He had a flashlight, and he was photographing pages with his phone. Not reading them. Photographing them. Fast, like he was in a hurry. And he kept looking at the door like he was afraid someone would come in. When he left, he locked the office with a key I've never seen before. Not Dad's key. A different one. Elena, I don't think Uncle Warren is supposed to be doing this. I don't think Dad knows. I want to tell Vivian, but she's away at that debate tournament and she won't be back until next week. I'm going to keep watching. Don't tell anyone about this letter. Promise me. Damien looked up. Vivian was holding the second letter. Her hands were shaking openly now. Not the controlled micro-tremor from the kitchen that first night, but real shaking, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in the body where the brain can't reach to stop it. Read the second one, she said, and her voice was barely there. The second letter was dated 3 weeks before Charlotte's death. Elena, I did something. I know I said I was just going to watch, but I did something. Uncle Warren left his briefcase in the mudroom last Tuesday. He was out at the south pasture with the foreman, and he left it by the door like he always does, and I opened it. I know I shouldn't have, but I opened it, and there were papers inside, not business papers. I know what business papers look like. Dad has them everywhere. These were different. They had numbers on them, Bank numbers, I think, like account numbers. And names. Companies I've never heard of. And there was a folder with a red tab that had copies of documents with Dad's signature on them, but some of the signatures looked wrong. Not like Dad's real signature. Close, but not right. Like someone practiced writing it. I took pictures with the camera Mom gave me for my birthday. The little blue one. And I took one of the papers. Just one. A page with a list of numbers and 2 signatures. Dad's real one from a contract I've seen before, and the fake one. I hid them. I hid them somewhere safe. Somewhere Uncle Warren would never look. I'm going to tell Vivian when she gets home. She'll know what to do. Don't tell anyone, Elena. I mean it. This is serious. The apartment was silent. Elena was sitting in a chair by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, tears running down her face without sound, the way people cry when they've practiced it enough that the sound isn't necessary anymore. Vivian was holding the 3rd letter. She hadn't opened it. The 3rd one, Elena said. That's the last one she ever wrote me. Vivian opened it. This letter was different. The handwriting was messier, rushed, uneven. The letters pushed together like the pen was being driven by urgency instead of care. It was dated the day before Charlotte died. Elena, I think he knows. Uncle Warren looked at me different at dinner tonight. He asked me questions about school and what I've been doing and whether I've been spending time in the house or outside. And his eyes were doing that thing. You know that thing where he looks at you like he's reading the back of your head. I'm scared. I should have told someone sooner. I should have told Dad. But Dad trusts Warren. And what if Dad doesn't believe me? What if Warren convinces him I'm making it up? I moved the stuff I hid. I put it somewhere better. Somewhere that means something to me but wouldn't mean anything to anyone else. If something happens, I don't know why I'm writing that. Nothing's going to happen. I'm being dramatic. But if something happens, tell Vivian to look where the stars are closest. She'll know what that means. She'll know. I love you, Elena. You're my best friend. I'll call you tomorrow. She never called. Vivian set the letter down on the coffee table. Her hands had stopped shaking. Everything had stopped. She was completely still. The stillness of a person whose worst suspicion has just been confirmed and whose body doesn't know yet whether to scream or collapse or do both at once. Where the stars are closest, Damien said. Vivian's eyes closed. When she opened them, they were clear. Brutally, terribly clear. The eyes of a woman who'd just had 14 years of uncertainty burned away in the time it took to read a dead girl's handwriting. The hayloft, she said. The old barn on the east side of the property. When we were kids, our father cut a hole in the roof. A skylight. A crude one. Just a square of glass set into the timber. Charlotte loved it. She'd climb up to the hayloft at night and lie on the hay and look through the skylight and she'd say the stars were closer up there. That was her phrase. Come up, Viv. The stars are closest here. Is the barn still standing? Yes. Warren wanted to tear it down years ago. I wouldn't let him. He thought I was being sentimental. He was right, but not for the reasons he assumed. Damien looked at Elena. Can we take the letters? Elena hesitated. She looked at the shoebox. 14 years of keeping a dead friend's words alive, 14 years of opening the box and closing it and opening it again. 14 years of a secret she'd been told to forget by everyone from her mother to a stranger in a suit with empty blue eyes. Take them, she said. Take them and do something with them. Because I've been holding on to Charlotte's voice for 14 years, and it's not fair. It's not fair that she trusted me and all I did was hide. You didn't just hide, Vivian said. You protected her words. When everyone else was destroying evidence and threatening witnesses and covering up a murder, you, a 12-year-old girl, kept the one thing that could bring it all down. You kept the truth. Elena cried harder. Vivian crossed the room and sat beside her and put her arm around her, and it was awkward. Vivian was not a person who hugged easily, who touched easily, who allowed physical proximity without the careful negotiation of distance she maintained with everyone. But she did it. She held a woman she hadn't seen in 14 years and let her cry into her shoulder and looked over Elena's head at Damien with an expression that was equal parts determination and devastation. They left San Antonio at 4:30. Ellie had finished her book and started it again from the beginning. She didn't ask about the meeting. She didn't ask why Vivian was quiet, or why Damien was driving faster than usual, or why both of them kept checking the rearview mirror. She just read her book and ate the bag of chips they'd bought at a gas station, and occasionally announced facts about deep-sea creatures to no one in particular. Anglerfish males are tiny, she said. They literally fuse to the female and dissolve into her body. That's what love looks like in the ocean. That's horrifying, Damien said. It's efficient. They drove through the sunset and into the dark. Vivian sat with the shoebox on her lap, her fingers resting on the lid, not opening it, just touching it. Like she was in communication with something. With Charlotte, with the past, with the 12-year-old girl who'd been brave enough to steal from a monster and smart enough to hide what she'd taken. Where the stars are closest. They reached the ranch at 11. Marcus met them at the gate. He looked at Vivian, looked at the shoebox, looked at Damien. We need to talk, Vivian said. Yes, Marcus said. We do, because Warren's people were here. 2 hours ago. They came to the gate, asked if you were home, and left. The temperature inside the truck dropped. Not literally, the heater was still blowing warm air, but the feel of it changed. The casual fear that had been humming in the background of everything since the drive out became something sharper, more immediate, a wire pulled taut. Did they come inside? Vivian asked. No, I told them you were asleep and didn't want to be disturbed. They sat outside the gate for about 40 minutes, watching. Just watching? Just watching. Then they left. Vivian looked at Damien. He looked at her. The same thought passed between them without words. Warren was paying attention. Warren was checking. The window they'd been operating in, the narrow gap between Warren's suspicion and Warren's certainty, was closing. We need to get to the east barn, Vivian said. Tonight. Tonight? Marcus said. Now. Marcus didn't argue. He'd been with Vivian long enough to know when the tone in her voice meant the decision was already made and discussion was just noise. He pulled the truck through the gate, and Damien drove to the main house while Marcus followed in his SUV. Ellie was asleep by the time they parked. Damien carried her inside, put her in the guest bed, tucked the rabbit under her arm. She stirred. Are we home? She mumbled. The word home caught him like a fishhook in the chest. She wasn't talking about Hargrove. She was talking about here, about this room, this bed, this ranch that she'd lived on for less than a month, but that had somehow become the place she meant when she said that word. Yeah, Bug. We're home. She settled back into sleep. He stood there for 10 seconds longer than he should have, watching her breathe, counting the inhales, doing the thing he always did. Then he left. Vivian was waiting outside with a flashlight. Marcus was there too, wearing the look of a man who had opinions about what was happening but had decided, for now, to keep them internal. The east barn is about a quarter-mile from the house, Vivian said, past the old stock tank. Past the stock tank where Charlotte... Yes. They walked in silence. The night was clear. No storm this time, no rain, just the vast West Texas sky with its impossible density of stars and the quarter moon throwing just enough light to see the path. The stock tank appeared out of the darkness like a wound in the landscape. A concrete-rimmed pool about 30 feet across, filled with black water that reflected the stars back at them like a second sky. Vivian stopped at the edge, looked at the water, looked at the concrete rim. Damien could see her placing the memory. 12 years old, best swimmer in the county, a wound on her head and a story that never made sense. She was right here, Vivian said, 14 years ago, right here. We don't have to stop. I know, but I want to, just for a second. She stood at the edge of the stock tank for 30 seconds. Not crying, not speaking, just standing. Then she turned and kept walking, and Damien followed, and Marcus followed, and the three of them moved through the dark toward the old barn, like people walking toward something they were afraid to find and more afraid not to. The barn was old, maybe 50 years, maybe more. Timber frame, tin roof, the kind of structure that West Texas ranches accumulate and keep because tearing them down costs more than letting them stand. The doors were heavy and warped, and it took Damien and Marcus together to pull them open enough to get through. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old hay and dust, and the particular dry sweetness of wood that's been baking in Texas heat for decades. Vivian swept the flashlight across the interior, stalls that hadn't held animals in years, equipment rusted in place, feed bins with their lids hanging open, and at the back, a ladder leading up to the hayloft. Charlotte used to climb that ladder every night in summer, Vivian said. My mother told her to stop. My father put a lock on the barn door. Charlotte picked the lock. She was 12 and she could pick locks. My father gave up. Vivian climbed first. The ladder was old but solid. The rungs held. The frame didn't shift. Damien followed. Marcus stayed at the bottom, watching the barn door, his hand resting on his hip near the place where Damien had noticed, on the first night, the shape of something clipped to his belt that wasn't a radio. The hayloft was a platform about 15 feet square, carpeted with ancient hay that crackled under their weight, and in the center of the ceiling, the skylight. A rough square of glass set into the timber, cloudy with age and dust, but still transparent enough to show the stars. Where the stars are closest, Vivian whispered. They searched. Vivian on one side of the loft, Damien on the other. They moved hay, checked the joints where the platform met the walls, ran their hands along the timber beams, pressed on floorboards looking for one that was loose. Damien found it. A board near the north wall, underneath a pile of hay that was older and more compacted than the rest, like it had been deliberately placed, deliberately packed, by someone who wanted it to look undisturbed. The board lifted when he pried the edge with his pocket knife. Underneath was a hollow, a space between the loft floor and the beam beneath it, about the size of a shoebox. Inside the hollow was a plastic bag, a gallon-sized zip-top bag, the kind you put sandwiches in. It was dusty, yellowed with age, but the seal was intact. Through the plastic, Damien could see papers, a folded document, and something else, a small blue camera, a child's camera, the kind parents buy as birthday gifts for kids who want to feel like photographers. He held it up. Vivian saw it and made a sound. Not a word, not a cry, something between the two, the sound a person makes when they've been searching for something for 14 years and suddenly they're holding it, and the weight of it is nothing and everything at the same time. That's her camera, Vivian said. The blue one. Mom gave it to her for her 12th birthday. She took pictures of everything. The horses, the sunset, Marcus pretending he wasn't smiling. She used to say she was documenting her life so people would know she was here. Damien handed the bag to Vivian. She opened it with shaking hands, carefully, the way an archaeologist opens a tomb. She unfolded the document. It was a single page, a list of account numbers, 8 of them, with corresponding entity names. Shell companies. The same kind Vivian had been tracing on her laptop in the kitchen. But these were different. These were older, dated 14 years ago, with handwritten notations in the margin that Vivian recognized immediately. That's Warren's handwriting, she said. Those notations, those are his. I've seen his handwriting on 1,000 documents. That's him. And at the bottom of the page, 2 signatures. One was labeled Robert Sinclair, Vivian's father. The other was also labeled Robert Sinclair. But they were different. Subtly, almost imperceptibly different. The slant of the R, the loop of the S, the pressure of the pen. One was real. One was a forgery. He was forging my father's signature, Vivian said. He was creating accounts in my father's name, moving assets, building his parallel structure, and he was doing it with forged authorization. This is fraud. This is criminal. Charlotte figured that out at 12 years old. Charlotte was smarter than any of us. She saw it. She understood it. She took the evidence and she hid it, and she was going to tell me, and he... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes went hard. He killed her, she said. He killed a 12-year-old girl because she caught him stealing from her own family. And then he stood in our living room and held my mother while she cried and told us it was an accident. The hayloft was silent except for the creak of the old timber and the wind moving through the gaps in the barn walls. The stars burned through the skylight, close and cold and indifferent. We have it, Damien said. Charlotte's letters, the document, the camera, if the photos are still on it, if the memory card still works. We take this to the authorities, not local. Warren owns local, federal, financial crimes, fraud, forgery, and murder. We take all of it. Vivian, Marcus's voice came from below, quiet, urgent. Someone's coming. They both froze. Damien moved to the edge of the loft and looked down. Marcus was at the barn door, his body pressed against the frame, looking out into the darkness. Beyond him, on the dirt road that led from the main house to the east side of the property, headlights, moving slowly. The crawl of a vehicle that was looking for something rather than going somewhere. Is it ranch security? Vivian asked. Not ours, Marcus said. That's an outside vehicle. Black Suburban. Same one that was at the gate earlier. Warren's people. They're coming to the barn? Damien asked. They're driving the perimeter, checking out buildings. They'll be here in about 3 minutes. Vivian looked at Damien. In the dim starlight of the hayloft, her face was sharp and scared and absolutely resolute. We go out the back, she said. There's a gap in the wall on the south side. It leads to the pasture. We can get to the house through the south gate without crossing the main road. And the evidence? I'm carrying it. All of it. They climbed down fast. Marcus led them to the back of the barn, where a section of wall siding had warped away from the frame, leaving a gap wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Vivian went first, holding the plastic bag against her chest. Damien followed. Marcus came last, pulling the warped siding back into position behind them. They moved through the dark pasture at a jog. Not running, because running made noise and noise carried in open country, but moving fast, staying low, following the fence line toward the south gate. Behind them, the headlights of the Suburban reached the barn and stopped. Damien's heart was hammering, not from the exertion, from the knowledge that his daughter was asleep in a house a quarter-mile away, and there were people on this property who worked for a man who had killed a child to protect his secrets. They reached the south gate. Marcus punched in a code. The gate opened. They crossed through to the house side of the property and kept moving until they reached the back porch, where they stopped, breathing hard, pressed against the stone wall of the mansion like fugitives in their own home. Ellie, Damien said. I'll check, Marcus said, and he disappeared inside. Damien and Vivian stood on the porch. The night air was cold. Their breath made small clouds that vanished instantly. Somewhere on the east side of the property, the Suburban was still moving. Damien could see the headlights sweeping along the fence line, probing, searching. He knows, Vivian said. He doesn't know what we found, but he knows something's changed. He can feel it. Warren has always been able to feel it the moment someone stops being afraid of him. He senses it like a change in pressure. Marcus came back. Ellie's asleep, hasn't moved. Damien exhaled. The relief hit him so hard his knees almost buckled. We leave tomorrow, Vivian said. Not San Antonio. Dallas. I have a law firm there that Warren doesn't control. Hartwell and Associates. They handle whistleblower cases, corporate fraud, federal referrals. I've been keeping them in my back pocket for 3 years, waiting for the day I had something to bring them. And now you do. Now I do. She looked at the plastic bag in her hands, the document, the camera, the evidence a 12-year-old girl had gathered and hidden and died for. She held it the way Damien had seen soldiers hold things in the field, close, careful, with the understanding that what you were carrying was worth more than you were, and that your job was to get it where it needed to go, regardless of what happened to you in the process. Vivian, Damien said. What? We're going to be okay. You don't know that. No, but I'm going to act like I do, because the alternative is standing on this porch until Warren's people find us. She looked at him. The starlight caught her eyes, and for a moment they weren't the clinical, assessing eyes he'd first seen in the study. They were Charlotte's eyes, Elena's eyes, the eyes of every person who'd been touched by this family's poison and had survived long enough to fight back. Okay, she said. Okay. They went inside. They locked the doors. Marcus took up a position in the front hallway with a clear line of sight to the main entrance and the driveway beyond it. The Suburban's headlights disappeared from the east fence line, and whether the vehicle had left the property or simply turned off its lights was a question none of them could answer and all of them were thinking about. Damien went upstairs, checked on Ellie. She was asleep. The rabbit was still under her arm. Her breathing was steady. He sat on the edge of the bed. His hands were dirty. Hay dust, barn grime. 14 years of settled particles from a hayloft where a dead girl had hidden the truth about her own murder. He should shower. He should sleep. He should do a lot of things. Instead, he sat there and watched his daughter breathe, and held on to the knowledge that tomorrow they would drive to Dallas and hand a law firm a plastic bag containing the last act of a 12-year-old girl who had been braver than every adult around her, and that the thing Charlotte Sinclair had started in secret, watching, documenting, hiding evidence in a hayloft where the stars were closest, was about to come into the light. And the man who had spent 14 years making sure it stayed buried was about to learn that some things don't stay in the ground. Not when a dead girl's best friend keeps her letters in a shoebox. Not when a billionaire with bare feet and shaking hands refuses to stop looking. Not when a broke welder from a dying town decides that fixing things is worth more than being safe. The house settled around him. The cameras blinked their red lights in the darkness outside. And somewhere, on a road between the ranch and wherever Warren Sinclair slept at night, a black Suburban carried a report back to a man who had controlled everything for 30 years and was about to discover that control, like concrete, can hold for decades. But when it cracks, it doesn't crack slowly. They never made it to Dallas. Warren moved first. Damien woke at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of Marcus pounding on the guest room door. Not knocking, pounding. The flat-handed urgency of a man who had abandoned courtesy because courtesy was too slow. "Get up, now, both of you." Ellie sat up in bed, clutching the rabbit, her eyes wide in the gray pre-dawn light. Damien was already moving, pants, boots, shirt, the automatic dressing of a man whose body remembered the army even when his mind had moved on. What's happening? Warren filed an emergency motion with the court in Pecos County 3 hours ago. He's seeking a temporary restraining order against Vivian, removal from company operations, asset freeze, mental health evaluation. He's claiming she's unstable and a danger to the family's financial interests. Can he do that? He's doing it. The judge is Howard Crane. He's been on Warren's Christmas card list for 20 years. The hearing is at 9. If Vivian doesn't appear, the order goes through by default, and Warren takes operational control of everything. The ranch, the accounts, all of it. Damien's mind was racing. 4 hours ago, they'd been standing on the back porch with a bag full of evidence. Now Warren was swinging, and swinging hard, with the precision of a man who'd had this contingency planned for years, waiting on a shelf like a fire extinguisher, ready to pull the pin the moment things got hot. "Where's Vivian?" "Study. She's been up since 4. You should come." Damien looked at Ellie. She was watching him with that expression, the one that cataloged information and drew conclusions faster than most adults. "Is this bad?" she asked. "It's complicated." Complicated usually means bad. "Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Marcus." "What about Vivian?" "Or Vivian." He kissed her forehead and followed Marcus downstairs. Vivian was in the study, but not behind the desk. She was standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by papers, printouts spread across the floor, the coffee table, the chair seats. Charlotte's letters were laid out on the desk alongside the document from the hayloft and the small blue camera, which was plugged into a laptop with a cable that looked like it had been jury-rigged from 3 different connectors. "The camera works," she said when Damien walked in. Her voice was flat, tight, the voice of someone operating on adrenaline and caffeine and the specific kind of fury that comes from being attacked by family. The memory card still had data, 47 photos. Charlotte photographed everything in Warren's briefcase, account statements, transfer orders, correspondence, and 6 pages of forged signatures. 6 pages, Damien. He wasn't just stealing from my father. He was building an entire shadow corporation using my father's identity. Vivian, I also pulled the financial records I've been compiling for the past 3 years. The shell companies, the transfers, the pattern of siphoning that I mapped on my laptop. Combined with Charlotte's evidence, it's a complete picture. 14 years of systematic fraud, asset theft, and identity falsification. Vivian, what? Warren filed a motion. You need to be in court in 4 hours. She stopped. The energy that had been driving her, the manic, fueled by discovery momentum, hit a wall. He watched it happen in real time, watched her face shift from determination to confusion to something colder, harder, the face of a woman who'd been fighting an opponent for so long that she recognized his moves before he finished making them. "Of course he did," she said. "Of course. He felt it last night, the shift, the change. His people came to the ranch, and when they left, they told him something was different. And Warren doesn't wait to find out what's different. He strikes first and sorts through the wreckage later. Can you fight the motion? Not in Howard Crane's courtroom. Crane will do what Warren tells him to do. He's been doing what Warren tells him to do for 2 decades. Then don't fight it in Crane's courtroom." She looked at him. "Take everything. The letters, the photos, the financial records, all of it. And don't go to Pecos County. Go to the FBI. Go to the federal prosecutor's office in San Antonio. Go over Warren's head, over Crane's head, over everybody's head. He built his system to control local courts, local police, local media. He didn't build it to control the federal government. If I don't show up to the hearing, the restraining order goes through. He gets control of the ranch, the accounts. Let him take it, all of it, for now. Because what you have on this desk is worth more than the ranch, more than the accounts, more than everything Warren thinks he's fighting for. You have proof that he forged your father's signatures, stole from his own family, and you have the basis for a murder investigation into a 12-year-old girl's death. A federal investigation, the kind Warren can't buy his way out of." The room was quiet. The first light of dawn was seeping through the windows, turning the sky from black to gray to the faintest edge of gold. On the desk, Charlotte's letters sat in their neat row. 11 letters, the last words of a girl who'd been brave enough to look at the truth and stupid enough to think that truth, by itself, was protection. It wasn't. Truth needed people to carry it. It needed someone willing to take the hit. "He'll come here," Vivian said. "If I don't show up to the hearing, the first thing Warren will do is come to this ranch with a court order and a security team and take possession. He'll change the locks. He'll access the files. Then we need to be gone before that happens." She looked at the evidence on the desk, looked at the study. Her father's desk, the room where she'd spent 14 years trying to hold on to what was left of her family. Then she looked at Damien. "I'm going to lose everything," she said. "No. You're going to lose the things Warren gave you. The rest, the things that are actually yours, those go with you." It took 40 minutes. Vivian packed the evidence into a hard-shell briefcase. Every letter, every photo printout, every financial document, the camera, a USB drive with the digital copies she'd made overnight. Marcus loaded the briefcase into the back of his SUV, along with a bag of Vivian's clothes and a folder of personal documents she pulled from a safe in the master bedroom. Damien packed their things, his and Ellie's, which wasn't much. The go bag, the toolbox, Ellie's books, borrowed from a library she'd probably never see again. The rabbit, which Ellie held against her chest with both arms, sensing without being told that this departure was different from the one she'd practiced in her head. "Are we coming back?" she asked. Damien looked at the mansion, at the stone walls and the cedar beams and the windows that had glowed amber during the storm, the first night, when he'd driven up the driveway in a dying truck with a rusted toolbox and a daughter who'd asked if this was a hotel. "I don't know, Bug. I like it here. I know. Nightfall is going to miss me. Horses have good memories. She'll remember you." They loaded into Marcus's SUV, bigger, more reliable, with a full tank and tinted windows that might buy them a few extra minutes of anonymity if Warren's people were watching the roads. Damien's truck stayed in the driveway, abandoned, leaking transmission fluid onto the stone like a wounded animal. Marcus drove. Vivian sat in the passenger seat with the briefcase on her lap. Damien and Ellie sat in the back. The gates opened. They pulled onto the county road. Nobody looked back. The drive to San Antonio took 5.5 hours this time. Marcus drove faster than Damien had, and the SUV handled the highway without any of the dramatic negotiations that Damien's truck required. Ellie fell asleep against Damien's shoulder around Sonora, her breath warm through his shirt, the rabbit wedged between her knees. Vivian was on the prepaid phone for most of the drive. She called the law firm in Dallas, Hartwell and Associates, and spoke to a senior partner named Catherine Hartwell for 45 minutes. detailing everything in a voice that was steady and specific and deliberately emptied of emotion, the way a surgeon describes a procedure. Then she called a second number, one she'd memorized years ago but never used, and Damien heard her say the words federal prosecutor and financial fraud and potential homicide and I have documentation. And the person on the other end of the line talked for a very long time. When she hung up, her hands were shaking again. The controlled shake, the subtle one. But there. They want to meet, she said. The U.S. Attorney's Office in San Antonio. They're sending someone to Catherine Hartwell's firm today. Today. They said the name Sinclair has been on a watch list for years. Multiple agencies have been circling Warren's financial structure, but nobody could get inside it. Nobody had the documentation. Charlotte got inside it. Charlotte got inside it 14 years ago, at 12 years old, with a birthday camera and a zip-top bag. They reached San Antonio at noon. Catherine Hartwell met them at a downtown office building. She'd flown in from Dallas on a charter that morning, which told Damien everything he needed to know about how serious this was. She was in her 50s, tall, gray-haired, with the calm intensity of someone who'd spent 30 years in courtrooms and had stopped being impressed by money a long time ago. She looked at the evidence for 2 hours. She read every letter. She examined every photograph. She went through the financial documents with the focused attention of a surgeon reading an MRI. When she was finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at Vivian. Your sister built this case better than most attorneys I know. She was 12. She was remarkable, and we're going to make sure it matters. The meeting with the federal prosecutor happened at 4. 2 people from the U.S., attorney's office, 1 FBI agent, and Catherine Hartwell, sitting around a conference table in a borrowed law office, while Damien waited in the hallway with Ellie, who was reading a book about volcanoes she'd found in the office's small waiting room. Is Vivian in trouble? Ellie asked. No, she's getting out of trouble. Is the uncle in trouble? Damien looked at his daughter. She knew more than she should. She always knew more than she should. The product of growing up with a single father who forgot sometimes that children hear things even when you think they're asleep. Yeah, Bug, the uncle is in trouble. Good. He has weird eyes. You've never met him. I saw him from the window when he came to the ranch. He walked like he was stepping on things that were smaller than him. Damien didn't know what to say to that. It was, like most of Ellie's observations, uncomfortably precise. The meeting lasted 3 hours. When Vivian came out, she looked like someone who'd been through something, not destroyed by it, but changed. The way metal looks after it's been through the forge. Different shape, harder edges, but stronger. They're opening an investigation, she said. Federal, multi-agency, financial crimes, wire fraud, identity theft, and they're reopening Charlotte's case as a potential homicide. The word homicide landed in the hallway and stayed there. How long? Damien asked. Weeks, maybe months. They need to build the case independently. They can't rely solely on Charlotte's evidence. They need to corroborate it with their own investigation. But they said, Catherine said, that what we brought them is the foundation, the thing they've been missing for years. And Warren? Warren doesn't know yet, but he will. Soon. He did. 3 days later, FBI agents served Warren Sinclair with a federal subpoena at his home in Dallas. They seized computers, financial records, and the contents of 2 safes. They also served subpoenas on 4 shell companies, 2 banks, and a law firm that had been facilitating transfers for over a decade. Warren's response was exactly what Vivian had predicted. Not panic, not flight, but aggression. Within 24 hours, his attorneys filed motions in 3 different courts. They issued public statements calling the investigation politically motivated. They launched a media campaign portraying Vivian as an unstable heiress, making baseless accusations against the uncle who'd raised her after her parents' death. It almost worked. For about a week, the narrative was Warren's, the steady, responsible patriarch being attacked by a troubled young woman and her, and this was the phrase his media team used, unvetted associates. Damien saw himself on the news, a photo from somewhere, his driver's license probably, alongside a headline that described him as a drifter, an itinerant laborer who had ingratiated himself with the Sinclair heiress. Drifter, Damien said, staring at his phone in the hotel room they'd been staying in since leaving the ranch. I've lived in Hargrove my entire adult life. I'm the opposite of a drifter. They don't care about accuracy, Vivian said. She was sitting on the other bed with her laptop open, monitoring the coverage the way a general monitors a battlefield. Clinically, systematically, tracking every development. They care about narrative, and the narrative Warren wants is simple. I'm crazy, you're a con man, and this whole thing is a manufactured attack on a good family. Is it working? For now. It won't last. The evidence is too strong. Catherine says the U.S. attorney is moving faster than expected. They've already found matching records at 2 of the banks. The forged signatures are being authenticated by independent experts. And the FBI they've found things at Warren's house. Things he should have destroyed years ago but didn't because he never believed anyone would get close enough to look. What kind of things? Financial records going back 20 years. And personal notes? Warren kept personal notes, handwritten, in journals. Detailed notes about the family's assets, about the trust structure, about Charlotte. He wrote about Charlotte. Catherine wouldn't give me details. She said the prosecutors want to build the case without my involvement in the specifics, to avoid any appearance of bias. But she said there are references. To the day Charlotte died. To what happened. And she said when I eventually see them, She said I should be prepared. Vivian's voice cracked on the last word. Not broke, cracked. The hairline fracture that Damien had been watching widen over the weeks since they'd met. The fault line running through the surface of a woman who'd held herself together with discipline and control and the fierce refusal to let anyone see her fall apart. She fell apart now. Not dramatically. Vivian Sinclair didn't do anything dramatically unless it was business. She just stopped. Stopped talking. Stopped typing. Stopped maintaining the architecture of composure that she'd been building since she was 17, and stood at her sister's funeral and watched a 12-year-old friend cry in a blue dress. Damien sat down next to her on the bed. Not close. He left space the way you leave space for someone who's been caged for so long that proximity feels like a wall. But close enough. She was so little, Vivian said. She was so little and she was so brave and she did everything right. She watched, she documented, she hid the evidence, she told someone she trusted. She did everything right, and it didn't save her. It's saving you. That's not enough. I know, but it's what there is. She leaned against him, not falling, not collapsing, leaning, the deliberate, voluntary act of a woman who was choosing, for the first time in 14 years, to let some of her weight rest on someone else. He felt her shoulder against his, her hair against his neck, the heat of her body through 2 layers of clothing. He put his arm around her. She didn't pull away. Ellie appeared in the doorway of the connecting room, holding the rabbit, looking at the 2 of them with an expression that contained no surprise whatsoever. Finally, she said. Go back to bed, Damien said. I've been waiting for this for like 3 weeks. You're 8. I'm observant. There's a difference. She disappeared back into her room. They heard the bed creak as she climbed in. Vivian laughed. It was small and broken and wet, and it was the first real laugh Damien had heard from her. Not the almost laugh, not the half laugh, but the real one. The one that came from somewhere below the armor, below the control, below the years of isolation and fear. Your daughter, Vivian said. Yeah. She's the best person I've ever met. She gets it from her mother. She gets it from both of you. The investigation took 11 weeks. In that time, Damien, Vivian, and Ellie moved between 3 hotels, 2 safe houses arranged by Catherine Hartwell's firm, and eventually a rented house in Austin, where Ellie enrolled in a school for the remainder of the semester and immediately became, according to her teacher, the most opinionated 3rd grader I've ever encountered. Vivian worked. Not at Sinclair Holdings. Warren's emergency motion had succeeded in Pecos County, and he'd taken operational control of the company and the ranch, at least temporarily. But Vivian worked with Catherine and the federal prosecutors, going through records, identifying transactions, explaining the family's financial architecture with the precision of someone who'd been studying it for years. She was good at it, sharp, thorough, relentless. The woman who'd wanted to study veterinary science had become, by necessity, an expert in the specific kind of financial crime her uncle practiced. Damien worked too. He found welding jobs in Austin, commercial work, industrial repair, the kind of steady employment that existed in a city instead of a dying town. He made decent money. He paid down the electric bill, the hospital payments, the accumulated debt that had been sitting on his shoulders like concrete since Sarah's death. He wasn't getting rich. He wasn't getting comfortable. But for the first time in 4 years, he was moving forward instead of standing still. And in the evenings, when Ellie was asleep and the house was quiet, he and Vivian sat on the back porch of the rented house and talked. Not about the case, not about Warren, not about the ongoing federal investigation that was dismantling the Sinclair empire piece by piece. About other things. About what came next. About what they wanted. About the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that the life they were living right now, cramped house, borrowed furniture, a kid who did her homework on the kitchen floor, might be better than the lives they'd had before. "I don't miss the ranch," Vivian said one night. This surprised Damien, and she saw that it surprised him, and she shook her head. "I miss Charlotte's barn. I miss nightfall. I miss the sky. But the house, the mansion, the stone floors, the art on the walls, I don't miss any of it. It was never mine. It was my father's, and then it was Warren's, and I just lived in it like a tenant who'd forgotten to leave." "What do you want?" Damien asked. "I want a house with a kitchen I can burn things in without it being a news story. I want a horse I can ride without a security detail following me. I want to wake up in the morning and not check the cameras to see who came to the gate while I was sleeping." "That's all achievable." "I know. That's what scares me. I spent so long wanting impossible things, justice, safety, Charlotte back, that I forgot how to want normal things. Normal things are harder. Impossible things you can't fail at because they were never going to happen anyway. Normal things, a kitchen, a horse, someone who stays, those you can lose." "I'm not going anywhere." "You keep saying that because it keeps being true." Warren Sinclair was arrested on a Tuesday morning in late spring. Federal marshals took him at his Dallas home. The charges were extensive. 18 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of identity theft, 6 counts of forgery, 4 counts of tax evasion, 2 counts of witness intimidation, and 1 count that the news reports described as obstruction of justice in connection with the death of Charlotte Sinclair, a minor. Not murder. Not yet. The prosecutors told Vivian that murder charges were possible, but would require additional evidence and grand jury proceedings. The obstruction charge was what they could prove now, that Warren had interfered with the original investigation into Charlotte's death, had intimidated witnesses, had destroyed evidence. The murder itself was harder. 14 years of cover-up had done what cover-ups do. Eroded the physical evidence, scattered the witnesses, buried the truth under layers of time and silence. But Warren's journals helped. The handwritten notes that he'd kept, the ones Catherine had warned Vivian about, contained entries from the week of Charlotte's death. Not confessions exactly. Warren was too careful for that. But references. Careful clinical references to the situation with C and the need for resolution and steps taken to protect the family's position. The kind of language a man uses when he's writing about something he did and doesn't want to name it, even to himself. Vivian read the entries in Catherine's office. Damien sat beside her. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She read every word, turned every page, and when she was finished, she set the copies down on the desk and said, in a voice that was very quiet and very steady, he called it a situation. My sister. He called her a situation. The trial took 4 months. Vivian testified for 3 days. She was questioned, cross-examined, challenged, and attacked by Warren's defense team, a squadron of attorneys from Houston who treated her the way Warren had always treated her, like a difficult asset that needed to be managed. She didn't manage. She told the truth. She told it clearly, chronologically, without embellishment, without self-pity, without the drama that the media was hoping for. She told the jury about Charlotte's letters. She told them about the hayloft. She told them about the forged signatures and the shadow corporation and the 14 years of control and surveillance and fear. She told them about a 12-year-old girl who'd written to her best friend, "Tell Vivian to look where the stars are closest," and then had gone to a stock tank she knew better than her own bedroom and had somehow, impossibly, accidentally drowned. Elena Reyes testified too. She told them about the letters, about the man who'd come to her family's house after Charlotte died, about 14 years of keeping a shoebox in her closet because throwing away a dead girl's words felt like letting the people who killed her win. The jury convicted Warren Sinclair on all counts in 6 hours. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. 23 years in federal prison. Warren stood in the courtroom in a suit that still looked expensive, his silver hair still perfectly cut, his blue eyes still empty. When the judge read the sentence, Warren's expression didn't change. He looked at Vivian across the courtroom with the same flat assessment he'd given Damien in the hallway of the ranch, categorizing, dismissing, filing her away in the column marked irrelevant. But his hands were shaking. Damien saw it. The small, uncontrollable tremor in the fingers of a man who'd spent 30 years holding everything together and had just felt the first crack become a collapse. Vivian saw it too, and she didn't look away. 6 months after the conviction, the ranch was returned to Vivian's control by court order. She drove out there on a Saturday morning with Damien and Ellie in the passenger seats of a new truck. Not new, but new to them. A used F250 that Damien had found in Austin and rebuilt the transmission on himself because some habits die hard, and this one shouldn't. The gates were open when they arrived. Not the security gates, those were still there. But they were open, unlocked, standing wide in the morning sun like arms extended. Vivian had given the order the day before. No more locked gates during the day. No more cameras on the fence line. The 47 surveillance cameras had been reduced to 12, all pointed outward, none pointed at the house. Marcus had supervised the removal personally, and Damien suspected he'd enjoyed it more than he'd ever admit. Ellie ran straight to the stable. Nightfall was there. The black mare lifted her head when Ellie appeared, and what happened next was something that Damien would remember for the rest of his life. The horse walked to the fence, lowered her head, and pressed her nose against Ellie's outstretched hand. No biting, no kicking, no fuss. Just a quiet, steady recognition, the way two beings acknowledge each other when the connection between them doesn't require language. "She remembers me," Ellie said. "She was waiting," Vivian said. The ranch changed over the following months. Not in the big ways. The house was still enormous. The land still stretched to the horizon. The sky was still the biggest sky in Texas. But in the small ways. The ways that mattered. The kitchen got used, badly at first, with burned meals and smoke alarms and one incident involving a Dutch oven that Damien swore he would never discuss publicly. But it got used. Food got cooked. Messes got made. The granite island that had been cold and empty the first night Damien arrived became a place where Ellie did homework and Vivian reviewed contracts and Damien spread out blueprints for the workshop he was building in the converted barn. Because that's what he did. He converted the main barn, not Charlotte's barn. That one stayed untouched. A memorial that nobody had to designate because everyone understood, into a welding and fabrication workshop. Professional equipment, proper ventilation, a client list that started with local ranchers and grew steadily into something larger. Structural repairs, custom metalwork, the kind of jobs that used every skill he had and paid well enough that the debt started shrinking instead of growing. He wasn't rich. He didn't want to be. He wanted to build things and fix things and come home at the end of the day to a kitchen that smelled like slightly burned food and a daughter who was reading books 3 grades above her level and a woman who still walked barefoot on stone floors, but who had, somewhere along the way, stopped looking like she was bracing for impact. Vivian created the foundation in Charlotte's name, the Charlotte Sinclair Foundation, dedicated to protecting vulnerable children and supporting struggling single-parent families. She funded it with a significant portion of the assets recovered from Warren Shadow Corporation, money that had been stolen from her family, laundered through shell companies, and hidden for 14 years. Turning stolen money into something that helped people felt, she told Damien, like the only thing that made sense. Elena Reyes became the foundation's first director. She moved from San Antonio to a small house on the ranch property, one of the foreman's quarters that Damien renovated, because renovating things was what he did. And she brought with her the same quiet strength she'd carried for 14 years. The shoebox of letters went to the foundation's office, where they were framed and displayed on a wall that Vivian visited every morning before she started work. Marcus stayed. He stayed because the job was different now. Not guarding a prisoner, not maintaining a cage, but protecting a family. A real one. The kind where an 8-year-old girl teaches you the NATO phonetic alphabet and calls you by your first name and tells you, with the unfiltered honesty that only children possess, that you'd look less scary if you smiled more. He smiled more. On a Saturday evening in late autumn, Damien sat on the porch of the ranch house, the porch where he and Vivian had stood in the dark after running from the east barn, pressed against the stone wall, listening for the Suburban's engine, and watched the sun drop below the West Texas horizon. The sky went from blue to gold to deep red, and the land turned dark and soft, and the stars began appearing one by one, filling the enormous space above him with the cold, distant, beautiful light that Charlotte Sinclair had loved. Ellie was in the stable, feeding Nightfall an apple. Marcus was sitting in a chair by the front door, reading a novel that Ellie had recommended, and that he would later describe reluctantly as not terrible. Vivian was inside, on the phone with Catherine Hartwell, discussing the final disposition of the company assets and the restructuring of Sinclair Holdings under new independent management. The door opened behind him. Vivian came out, barefoot as always, and sat down in the chair next to his. She'd been on the phone for an hour, and her voice was slightly hoarse, and she looked tired in the normal way that people look tired. The end of a long day kind, not the end of a long decade kind. Catherine says the restructuring should be complete by spring. New board, new management, independent oversight. Warren's trust is being dissolved. Good. She also said the prosecutors are moving forward with the murder charge. Grand jury next month. Damien looked at her. How do you feel about that? I feel like it should have happened 14 years ago. I feel like my sister should be alive. I feel like my mother should have lived long enough to see Warren answer for what he did. I feel angry and sad and relieved and guilty, all at the same time, and I don't know which one to sit with. All of them. That's the only option that works. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's honest. And honest is better than numb. She reached over and took his hand. Not dramatically. Not in the way that happens in stories where everything is timed and lit and scripted. She just reached over and took it, the way a person does when they've decided that the space between two chairs is too wide, and the simplest solution is a hand. Her fingers were cold. They were always cold. One of the many small, imperfect details that Damien had cataloged over the months. Cold fingers, a tendency to burn food, a habit of walking into rooms and forgetting why she'd come, a laugh that was still rare but getting less so, a way of standing at windows and looking at landscapes as if she were seeing them for the first time, even though she'd been looking at them her whole life. She wasn't perfect. She was difficult and guarded and sometimes sharp in ways that left marks. She worked too much and slept too little and had a relationship with vulnerability that was, at best, adversarial. She made decisions without consulting anyone, and then was surprised when people had opinions about those decisions. She was learning, slowly, imperfectly, the way everyone learns. Damien wasn't perfect either. He was stubborn and proud and had a tendency to carry things alone when he should ask for help. He spent too much time in the workshop and not enough time sitting still. He talked to his dead wife sometimes, late at night, standing in the driveway the way he used to in Hargrove, telling Sarah about the day, about Ellie, about the woman he'd met during a storm who was nothing like Sarah and wasn't trying to be. He didn't know if that was healthy. He didn't know if it mattered. Ellie came running across the yard, covered in hay and horsehair, the rabbit dangling from one hand. Nightfall ate the whole apple, core and everything. Is that okay? Can horses eat apple cores? I feel like I should have researched this before I gave it to her. Horses can eat apple cores, Vivian said. You're sure? I almost became a veterinarian, I'm sure. Ellie climbed onto Damien's lap. She was getting big for this, 8 going on 9, long-legged, all elbows and knees, but she fit, the way she'd always fit, curled against his chest with her head under his chin and the rabbit pressed between them. Daddy? Yeah, Bug? Are we staying? He looked at Vivian. She looked at him. The sky behind her was darkening, the last light fading, the stars coming out in their millions, close and bright and steady. "Yeah," he said. "We're staying." Ellie nodded against his chest. "Good. Because I already told my teacher I live on a ranch and she didn't believe me and I need to prove it." "That's your reason?" "I have other reasons, but that's the urgent one." The three of them sat on the porch as the night came in. Marcus went inside at some point, and the lights in the house turned on behind them, warm and amber, throwing long rectangles of gold across the stone. Somewhere in the stable, nightfall made a sound. Low, contented, the sound of an animal that had stopped waiting. Here's the thing about people who have been broken. They don't get fixed. Not really. Not the way a fence gets fixed, or a roof gets sealed, or a transmission gets rebuilt. The cracks stay, the scars stay. The memories of the damage stay. What changes is not the damage itself, but the relationship to it. The way a person carries what happened to them. The way they hold it. The way they let it sit alongside the new things growing up through the wreckage. Vivian Sinclair owned everything and had nothing. A broke welder from a dying town showed up during a storm and didn't look at the money, didn't calculate the advantage, didn't ask what he could get. He looked at the woman, and the woman, for the first time in 14 years, let herself be seen. That's not a love story. Or maybe it is. Maybe the best love stories aren't about two people finding each other. Maybe they're about two people who were both drowning, in different oceans, for different reasons, and who happened to reach the surface at the same time, in the same place, gasping for the same air. Damian Carter arrived at Sinclair Ranch looking for a paycheck. He found a dead girl's truth hidden in a hayloft, a billionaire trapped in a cage made of leverage and fear, and a reason to stop just surviving and start building something worth keeping. Vivian Sinclair spent 14 years behind locked gates and surveillance cameras, waiting for someone brave enough to ask the questions nobody else would ask. She didn't find a hero. She found a tired man with a rusted toolbox and a daughter who talked to horses and a refusal, bone deep and immovable, to walk away from things that were broken. Neither of them saved the other. That's not how it works. That's not how anything works. They just decided, separately and together, that the truth was worth more than safety, that love was worth more than control, and that the bravest thing a person can do isn't fight. It's stay. Stay when it's hard. Stay when it's dangerous. Stay when every rational calculation says to run. On the porch, Ellie fell asleep. Damian carried her inside the way he always did. Vivian followed, barefoot on stone floors that were finally, after all these years, warm. The gates stayed open, the stars burned overhead, and somewhere in the house, in a room that used to be a study and was now just a room, no ghosts, no locked drawers, no shadows that nobody talked about, a framed photograph sat on a bookshelf. Two girls on a fence rail, squinting into the sun, arms around each other, smiling like the future was something to look forward to. Charlotte would have been 26. She would have been extraordinary. She would have done things that mattered and loved people who deserved it, and written letters that made the world feel smaller and kinder and more honest. She didn't get that chance. But her words survived, her truth survived, and the sister she left behind finally stopped carrying it alone. That's the story. Not of a billionaire and a welder, not of money and poverty, power and helplessness, but of a 12-year-old girl who hid the truth where the stars are closest, and the people who found it, and what they built from the wreckage of everything that tried to keep it buried.